Hey, welcome back. Wherever you are right now, lying in bed with the lights off, curled up on the couch with a blanket pulled to your chin, headphones in while the rest of the world does something loud and exhausting without you. I'm glad you're here. Tonight we're going somewhere quiet. We're going deep into the trees. There is a town in the Pacific Northwest, tucked somewhere in the forests of Oregon, that exists just on the far side of normal. You won't find it on any standard road map. If you drive far enough down the right state highway and take a turn that doesn't quite make sense geographically, and then keep going past the point where the radio stations start to crackle and fade, you might eventually come upon a dirt road. And if you follow that road through pines so tall they blot out most of the afternoon sky, and if you round a bend just as the light starts doing something strange in the gaps between the branches, you might find yourself looking at a wooden sign hammered into the earth beside the road, the paint just beginning to peel at the edges. The sign says Gravity Falls, Oregon, population 12, and underneath it, some local wit has scratched the number out and replaced it with a question mark. That's probably accurate. For 2 summers, or really one long summer that stretched across 2 television seasons and 4 years of real-world time, a 12-year-old boy named Dipper Pines and his twin sister Mabel lived in that town. They came from Piedmont, California, sent by their parents to spend the summer months with their great-uncle, a man known to everyone in Gravity Falls as Grunkle Stan. Stan ran a tourist trap called the Mystery Shack out of a converted research facility in the woods, charging visitors several dollars to look at exhibits that he had largely made up himself. The wax figures weren't real artifacts. The bottomless pit exhibit had a real bottomless pit in it, which he somehow got away with for decades. The stuffed animals in the gift shop were unsettling in a very specific way that no one could quite articulate. Dipper and Mabel arrived expecting a boring summer. They got something considerably different. In the first episode, which aired on June 15th, 2012 on the Disney Channel, Dipper stumbles upon a journal hidden inside a hollow tree in the woods behind the Mystery Shack. The journal is numbered 3, suggesting the existence of at least 2 others, and its cover bears the image of a 6-fingered hand. On inside, Dipper finds detailed notes, observations, warnings, and illustrations about the supernatural creatures and phenomena that inhabit Gravity Falls. The first entry he reads is about gnomes. The gnomes are real. They kidnap Mabel almost immediately and try to force her to become their queen. This is the surface level of Gravity Falls. It is funny, charming, a little spooky in the way that a Halloween decoration is spooky, warm, and self-aware, and thoroughly enjoyable. A lot of people watched it for exactly those reasons and had a genuinely wonderful time without ever going any deeper than that. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that experience. The show works beautifully at the surface level, but the surface is just where it starts. The person who made Gravity Falls was a man named Alex Hirsch, born in Piedmont, California, on June 18, 1985, the same day as his twin sister Ariel. He grew up in the same town that he gave to Dipper and Mabel. Between the ages of 9 and 13, he and his sister would spend summers at the cabin of their great-aunt, a woman he called Grunty Lois, somewhere in the woods. He described those summers as long and somewhat slow, with a lot of time to sit and let his imagination expand into the empty space. He wanted to recreate that feeling of being a kid in the woods, where the ordinary and the extraordinary could exist in easy proximity, where the trees were tall enough and dark enough that you couldn't entirely rule out the possibility of something watching from within them. He based Dipper on himself, not on any specific version of himself, but on the feeling of being the age he was. That particular combination of curiosity and anxiety and earnest desire to understand everything, the notebook-carrying, question-asking, mystery-obsessing kind of child who is always slightly out of step with the world because the world isn't quite strange enough for what's happening inside their head. He based Mabel on his sister Ariel. He told interviewers that she really did wear wild sweaters and have a new ridiculous crush every week, that she had an energy that was impossible to contain, that she could find a reason to be delighted by almost anything. He gave Mabel a pet pig because his sister had always wanted one. And Grunkle Stan, the gruff, goofy, endlessly surprising great-uncle who turns out to have been hiding something enormous for 30 years, was inspired in part by Alex Hirsch's own grandfather, Stan, who would goof around with him and his sister to keep them entertained. The warmth underneath the prickly exterior, the jokes that hide something genuine, The sense that this person loves you in a way they don't quite know how to express directly. All of that came from a real person, a real relationship, a real kind of love that most people recognize even when they can't name it. Gravity Falls is a show made from real memories, which is part of why it lands the way it does. The gnomes are invented, obviously. The interdimensional demon plotting the end of reality is invented. The portal beneath the gift shop and the secret research lab and the 30-year identity theft are invented. But the feeling underneath all of it, the feeling of being a child in a summer that seems infinite, the feeling of slowly discovering that the adults in your life are more complicated than they appeared, the feeling of your relationship with your sibling being the one constant in a world that keeps changing shape, that is not invented. That is pulled directly out of lived experience and offered to anyone who has ever felt something similar. Alex Hirsch graduated from the California Institute of the Arts in 2007. He worked as a writer and storyboard artist on Disney's Fish Hooks, while quietly developing a more personal project on the side. He spent years pitching it, refining it, working through the mythology and the character dynamics, and the long arc planning that would make the show capable of sustaining the kind of secrets it needed to sustain. When Gravity Falls finally premiered, it was a show that already knew how it was going to end. The hidden messages in the opening credits of the very first episode pointed toward things that wouldn't be revealed for years. The symbols in the opening sequence represented characters who hadn't been introduced yet. The foreshadowing was so deep and so patient that even careful viewers would spend months or years not fully understanding what they had already seen. That level of intentionality is rare in television. It's especially rare in children's television. Most animated shows for young audiences are built to be self-contained, episodic, each episode largely separate from the others, the kind of thing you can start anywhere and understand immediately. Gravity Falls looks like that on the surface and is absolutely not that underneath. It is a tightly constructed, but meticulously planned mystery novel that happens to look like a cartoon about a kid and his pig-owning sister going on adventures in the woods. The adventures are real. The pig is real. Waddles is, by widespread consensus, one of the most beloved supporting characters in the history of animation. And he is a pig who appears in maybe a dozen episodes and does very little except eat things and be soft. He represents pure, uncomplicated joy in a show that otherwise deals with themes of betrayal, memory loss, manipulation, and existential dread. He is perfect. But tonight we are going into the deeper parts of Gravity Falls. The parts that are still there on your second watch, your fifth watch, the watch you do at 2 in the morning when you can't sleep, and you need something that is both familiar and astonishing. Well, we are going to trace the mythology from its ancient roots through its devastating conclusion, stopping at every hidden detail, every layered secret, every moment that gets heavier, the more you understand about what surrounds it. This is going to take a while. That's the point. If you're here to fall asleep, let my voice be the pine trees. Let the story wash over you the way a good summer evening washes over everything. If you drift off somewhere in the middle, that's fine. The town will still be here when you come back. The journals are still in the hollow trees. The lights in the mystery shack are always on. But before we go any further, I want to ask you to do 2 things. First, if you're enjoying what you hear tonight, please subscribe to the channel. It costs nothing. It helps enormously. And it means more nights like this one can exist. And second, genuinely, I'm curious. Drop a comment telling me where you are right now and what time it is. What corner of the world are you watching from? At what hour? In what light? There is something wonderful about knowing that people are in beds and on couches and in night shift break rooms all over the world. And we are all, for a few hours, in the same small Oregon town. Okay, ready? Let's go to Gravity Falls. Section 2. The Opening Secrets. The first frame of the first episode of Gravity Falls is a forest. Not a friendly forest, not a forest bathed in warm golden light. A forest at dusk, deep and dense, the pine trees so close together that the shadows between them look almost solid. The title card fades in over those trees, and then the theme music begins. Now, if you have watched this show at any point in the last 12 years, you know the theme. It has a whistled melody that is both catchy and slightly melancholy, like a song you half remember from a summer you can't quite place. It is the kind of music that, when you hear it anywhere, in a grocery store, in a YouTube video coming from another room, you feel it somewhere specific in your chest. It is one of the most effective 30-second pieces of music in television history, and most people give it only half their attention because they are waiting for the episode to start. That is a mistake. The opening theme of Gravity Falls is a puzzle. It has been a puzzle since the very first episode aired in June of 2012, and it contains information that, if you knew how to read it, would tell you things about the show's deepest secrets years before those secrets were ever revealed. Most of that information was hiding in the open the entire time. Here's the most famous piece. During the opening sequence, there is a moment where a string of letters flashes on screen, just for a fraction of a second before the image cuts away. On any normal watch, you simply don't catch it. It's gone before you can focus on it. But in the age of the pause button and the screenshot, someone eventually caught it, and when they wrote the letters down and applied a Caesar cipher, shifting each letter back 3 positions in the alphabet, so D becomes A, E becomes B, and so on, the message revealed itself. Stan is not what he seems. Sit with that for a moment. From the very first episode, before you know anything about the secret room beneath the vending machine, before you know anything about the portal in the basement, before you know that the man running the Mystery Shack has been living under his brother's stolen identity for 3 decades, the show is already telling you everything you need to know. It is whispering the answer to its central mystery in a code that it is simultaneously teaching you how to break. Because here's the second piece of the puzzle. At the very end of the opening theme, if you play the audio backwards, you hear a whispered message. The whisper says, 3 letters back. That is the key. That is Alex Hirsch, literally including the solution to the cipher inside the cipher itself, or in a location you can only reach by doing exactly the kind of obsessive, backward-playing analysis that the show is trying to inspire. The answer was always in the question. The key was always inside the lock. As the show progressed through its first season, the cipher system evolved. The first 6 episodes used that Caesar cipher with a 3-letter shift, and the reversed whisper told you how to use it. Starting with episode 7, the credits cryptogram switched to an @bash cipher, in which the alphabet is simply reversed. A becomes Z, B becomes Y, and so on. The new whisper in the theme changed to match. Switch A with Z. And starting with episode 14, the system shifted again to the A1Z26 cipher, where letters are replaced with their numerical positions in the alphabet. The whisper updated accordingly, 26 letters. Then season 2 began and everything upgraded to a Visionaire cipher, which is a significantly more sophisticated system. Rather than applying a single uniform shift to every letter, a Visionaire cipher uses a keyword, and each letter of that keyword tells you how far to shift the corresponding letter of the encoded message. The keyword changes with every single episode of the second season, and the key to finding each keyword is hidden somewhere within the episode itself. You have to watch the episode, find the keyword hidden in the background of a scene or written on a wall somewhere, and then use it to decode the credits message that relates to the episode you just watched. The show was teaching its audience cryptography in real time through the episodes themselves. The message hidden in the season 2 premiere of Gravity Falls, decoded with the keyword whittle, which appears written on a prison cell wall in the episode, Maya reads, "Welcome back." That is Alex Hirsch acknowledging that you, the obsessive viewer, the person who is pausing and reversing and cross-referencing and filling notepads with decoded messages, have been seen. He knows you're there. He's glad you came back. The decoded messages throughout the series range from jokes to foreshadowing to genuinely unsettling revelations. Episode 3 of Season 1, the one about the headhunters, has a credits message that reads, "He's still in the vents." Nobody knows who is in the vents. This has never been explained. Episode 5's decoded message says, "Mr. Caesarian will be out next week. Mr. @bash will substitute," which is Alex Hirsch's way of telling the community that the cipher system is about to change in Episode 7 before Episode 7 has aired. He was having a conversation with the audience across the credits of a Disney Channel cartoon using codes. But the opening sequence contains more than just the credits cryptogram. There is the Bill cipher wheel. Near the end of the opening theme, there is a very quick flash of a circular diagram. It appears for maybe a second, possibly less. At its center is a single yellow eye, recognizable to any longtime fan as Bill Cipher in his basic triangular form. Arranged around him on the wheel are 10 symbols: a pine tree, a shooting star, a pair of glasses, a six-fingered hand, a question mark, a crescent with a star, a bag of ice, a llama, a pentagram, and a heart. But these symbols were sitting in the opening credits from episode 1, and for quite a long time they seemed to be simply decorative, atmospheric, part of the show's general aesthetic of occult imagery and mysterious diagrams. Then, over the course of seasons 1 and 2, viewers began to match the symbols to characters. The pine tree is Dipper, who has a pine tree on his hat. The shooting star is Mabel, who has one on her favorite sweater. The glasses belong to Fiddleford McGucket. The six-fingered hand belongs to Ford. The question mark belongs to Seuss, whose shirt has one on it. The crescent with a star belongs to Gideon. The bag of ice belongs to Wendy. The llama belongs to Pacifica. The pentagram belongs to Robbie. The heart belongs to Grunkle Stan. Each of those symbols, arranged around the central figure of Bill Cipher, represents one of the key people in the show's story. And the wheel is not just decorative. In the series finale, it is revealed to be a prophecy handed down from an ancient Native American shaman named Modoc, who encountered Bill Cipher long before the Pines family ever arrived in Oregon. The prophecy states that if all 10 figures represented on the wheel join hands in a circle, they will have the power to destroy Bill once and for all. The wheel was sitting in the opening credits from episode 1. The prophecy that would power the final confrontation of the series was hiding in a 2-second flash in the theme song of the very first episode. Hirsch planned the ending before he wrote the beginning. The finale was baked into the opening. Every episode you watched, every time that theme song played, you were looking at the answer without knowing it was there. There are other things hiding in the opening as well. The Polaroid photographs that flash by during the theme include images of creatures and characters that appear throughout the series. But if you look carefully, you can spot things that shouldn't be there yet. Hints toward revelations that don't happen until much later. Background details that take on entirely new meaning once you understand the full story. Alex Hirsch himself appears in the opening credits, visible behind a photograph of a witch's hand and a taxidermied jackalope, watching from the background of a scene he created. And then there is the image of a young Dipper floating in the woods while objects around him begin to drift upward, as if gravity has been suspended. That image is foreshadowing for the episode Not What He Seems in Season 2, when Stan activates the interdimensional portal to full power and causes gravitational anomalies across Gravity Falls. The opening credits showed it to you first. Beyond the opening theme, the show was absolutely filled with hidden text and visual detail in the backgrounds of scenes. The symbol of the Society of the Blind Eye, a crossed-out eyeball, appears painted on walls and scratched into surfaces all the way back in the early episodes of Season 1, long before that organization is ever mentioned or explained. The show was building a world and populating it with secrets, and trusting that someone would eventually notice. One of the most quietly extraordinary things about Gravity Falls is the number of viewers who built communities around the act of noticing. Forum threads and subreddits dedicated to hunting through screenshots frame by frame. Spreadsheets cross-referencing decoded messages with episode events. Fan wikis that accumulated detail upon detail over the years the show aired, and then kept accumulating detail in the years after it ended. The community that formed around Gravity Falls is one of the most dedicated and thoughtful fan communities in animation history. And the show functionally created it by treating its audience as intelligent enough to deserve a genuine puzzle. Most television does not do that. Most television, especially television aimed at children, assumes that the audience wants things to be clear and simple and emotionally legible. Gravity Falls assumed the opposite. It assumed that its audience wanted to work, wanted to dig, wanted to feel the particular satisfaction of decoding something that was genuinely difficult. It treated 11-year-olds and 40-year-olds with exactly the same level of respect, which is rare and wonderful and a significant part of why the show has never really stopped being relevant. The hidden messages aren't separate from the show. They are the show. The act of looking for them, of paying attention, of trusting that there is something worth finding, that is exactly what the story asks of you. Dipper finds Journal 3 in a hollow tree because he was paying attention. But you find the foreshadowing in the opening credits because you were paying attention. The show rewards attention at every level. That is not an accident. That is the point. Section 3. The journals. Somewhere in the woods behind the mystery shack, there is a hollow tree. Inside the tree, wrapped in protective material and left there deliberately, is a journal. It is Journal 3. It has a brown cover, a six-fingered handprint embossed on the front, and inside it is filled with notes, illustrations, warnings, and observations about the supernatural phenomena of Gravity Falls, Oregon. It was left there by its author, who was afraid that if anyone found it, they might use it to do something catastrophic. He was not wrong about that. But the journal Dipper finds is the third one. There are 3 total, all written by the same person, and all part of an ongoing record of years of research into the strangest place in the continental United States. Understanding what the journals are, how they were made, and where they ended up is essentially the backbone of the entire first season of the show. The journals were written by Stanford Philbrick Pines, Ford, as most people call him, who arrived in Gravity Falls, Oregon, sometime in the 1970s as a young researcher with a newly awarded doctoral degree, a significant research grant, and a burning need to understand things that didn't fit into normal categories of understanding. Ford was unusual in multiple ways. He had an IQ that placed him far outside the standard range, which had been simultaneously an advantage and a source of isolation his entire life. He had been born with 6 fingers on each hand, and a condition known as hexadactyly, which had caused him no end of social difficulty growing up in Glass Shard Beach, New Jersey. And he had a mind that was drawn, with an almost gravitational pull, toward things that didn't make sense. He chose Gravity Falls because his research indicated it was the most concentrated point of paranormal and supernatural activity in the United States. Something about the geography, the geology, the long and strange history of the region had created conditions that attracted the impossible, or perhaps created it, or perhaps revealed it. The exact mechanism was something he was still working to understand. He built a large, isolated research lab in the forest using his grant money and began exploring. The first journal covers the earliest years of his research. Creatures observed, phenomena cataloged, experiments conducted. The tone is methodical, scientific, the voice of a man who has set out to apply rigorous systematic inquiry to things that actively resist rigorous systematic inquiry. The second journal goes deeper, both literally and metaphorically, as Ford's research becomes more expansive and he begins to work on larger projects, most notably a dimensional portal, capable of opening a passage between our world and whatever lies beyond it. The third journal is where things start to go wrong. By the time Ford was writing Journal 3, he had been in Gravity Falls for about 6 years. He had documented an extraordinary number of supernatural entities and phenomena. He had built a bunker in the woods to house his most dangerous experiments, including a terrifying shapeshifter capable of transforming into any creature or person it has ever seen. He had created a mind-swapping device called the Electron Carpet. He had designed a mind control tie that he had intended to use on a presidential candidate named Ronald Reagan. He was, by any reasonable measure, operating well outside the boundaries of responsible scientific practice, and the influence of something very old and very interested in his work was already being felt in the pages of his writing. The handwriting in Journal 3 changes over its course. In the early entries, it is neat and measured. By the later entries, it has become cramped, rushed, paranoid. Warnings appear where there used to be observations, and certain passages are written in invisible ink that can only be seen under a blacklight. A security measure Ford implemented because he no longer trusted that normal concealment was sufficient. The journal is not just a record of what Ford found in Gravity Falls. It is also a record of what Gravity Falls did to him. When you read Journal 3 with the full knowledge of what happened to Ford, the progression is genuinely heartbreaking. You can see the exact point where optimism tips over into fear, where curiosity gives way to dread. You can trace the increasing influence of a triangular entity in a top hat. You can watch a brilliant mind slowly come apart under the dual pressure of genuine discovery and systematic manipulation. The real-world version of Journal 3, published by Disney Press on July 26, 2016, became a New York Times #1 bestseller and remained on the list for 47 weeks. It was co-authored by Alex Hirsch and Rob Renzetti, and it is significantly more detailed than the pages shown in the series. The book includes entries that were written for the novel specifically, expanding on Ford's years in Gravity Falls, his relationship with Bill, his experiences during his 30-year exile between dimensions, and his inner life during all of it. It is annotated throughout by Dipper and Mabel, who clearly found the book and read through it during their summer, their handwritten notes in the margins ranging from excited observations to concerned questions, to Mabel drawing hearts around an entry about her pig. There is also a special edition of the Real Journal 3, released in limited quantities. That includes blacklight reactive invisible ink writing throughout the pages. You need to shine a blacklight on certain pages to see what Ford wrote in those margins, in those secret spaces that he didn't want anyone to find. The experience of discovering what's hiding in the margins of the special edition is a fairly precise recreation of what it feels like to re-watch Gravity Falls and see all the things you missed the first time. The hidden things are always there, you just needed the right kind of light. Journal 1 in the show's fiction is the first volume Ford wrote. By the end of the series, this journal is in Stan's possession, found during the years of his attempt to reconstruct and restart the portal. It contains Ford's original notes on the portal's operation, and along with warnings about what would happen if the portal were activated, warnings that Stan, in his desperation to bring his brother back, chose to ignore. The journal also contains Ford's note about the Society of the Blind Eye, which includes a cipher that, once decoded, reveals Ford's suspicion that Fiddleford McGucket was involved in founding the organization. Journal 2 is the darkest of the three in terms of content. It was created during the period when Ford was deepest in his collaboration with Bill Cipher, and contains detailed technical specifications for the dimensional portal, instructions for how to summon Bill, and increasingly alarmed observations about Ford's own mental state. Fiddleford McGucket had access to Journal 2 during the construction of the portal, and based his laptop's operating system partially on technical diagrams within it. When Dipper later finds circuit board fragments from that laptop, the McGucket Labs logo on those fragments is what first tips him off to Fiddleford's connection to the journals. Journal 2 also includes, in Cipher, some of Bill's personal annotations. In the show's mythology, Bill was able to influence Ford's mind and leave messages within the pages of the journal that Ford himself might not have consciously registered writing. These messages are generally taunting, occasionally threatening, and, once decoded, reveal that Bill was aware of far more of Ford's movements and thoughts than Ford ever realized. The three journals together form an archaeology of a man's descent and recovery. Individually, each one is a piece of a puzzle. Together, they are the full story of what happened in Gravity Falls in the years before Dipper and Mabel arrived. The backstory that gives everything they experience its weight and context. When Dipper reads an entry in Journal 3 about a creature, he is reading something Ford wrote in a state of fear and confusion and desperate hope. The journal is not just a field guide. It is an act of trust across time, a message in a bottle from a man who knew someone would eventually need what was inside. The specific visual language of the journals, the six-fingered handprint, the careful ink illustrations, the technical diagrams alongside the creature descriptions, became iconic almost immediately. The handprint in particular functions as a signature, a seal, a claim. This was made by a person with 6 fingers on each hand. This is the mark of the person you are looking for. It is the central symbol of the show's longest mystery, the thing that ties Journal 1 to Journal 2 to Journal 3, the proof that there is a single mind behind all of this extraordinary documentation. Finding out who that mind belongs to is effectively the whole of Season 1. And the answer, when it finally arrives in the season, 2 premiere A Tale of Two Stands, changes everything about what you thought you understood. But we will get to that. We have time. The forest is quiet, and there is more to cover before the light changes. Section 4. Bill Cipher's origin. Let's talk about where Bill Cipher came from. The answer is more complicated and significantly more tragic than you might expect from a character who is ostensibly a yellow triangle with a top hat and a cartoonishly exaggerated enthusiasm for chaos. Bill Cipher, the main villain of Gravity Falls, the would-be architect of the end of reality as we know it, did not begin as a demon. He was not conjured from nothing. He was not always what he is. Something made him this way, and that something is, in its own way, one of the saddest things the show has to offer. Bill Cipher's earliest confirmed backstory, expanded significantly in The Book of Bill published in July 2024, tells us that he originated in a place called the second dimension, or Euclidia. Euclidia was a two-dimensional universe, genuinely physically flat, a world where everything existed only in length and width, where the very concept of depth was beyond comprehension. The beings who lived there were two-dimensional as well, flat geometric shapes with flat perspectives and flat understanding. Bill was born there approximately 1 trillion years before the events of Gravity Falls, though some of his own claims about his age vary wildly and should be treated with the appropriate skepticism one applies to a chaos demon's autobiography. His parents were named Scalene and Euclid, geometric names for geometric people in a world where geometry was the organizing principle of existence. Bill was, by the account of the Book of Bill, born with what his world would have considered a mutation. He could see the third dimension. Think about what that means. In a world of perfect flatness, a world where up and down, forward and backward are the only axes of movement and meaning, Bill Cipher was born with an eye that could perceive depth. He could see the world his people could not reach. He could perceive a dimension that was fundamentally inaccessible to everyone around him. He was, by his own later account, ostracized for this, feared for this. The same ability that was his greatest power was the thing that made him impossible to belong among his own kind. The show's mythology presents this as a story of isolation, producing resentment, producing catastrophe. A being who could see what others couldn't, who found no understanding among the people who should have been his community, who eventually took that cosmic loneliness and let it curdle into something much darker. The Death Battle Wiki, drawing from multiple canonical sources, and notes that Bill became so bored and frustrated with the flat existence of his home dimension that he destroyed it, obliterated Euclidia entirely, killing everyone who had ever lived there, including his own parents. Then he remade himself in the act of that destruction, emerging from the rubble of an entire universe as something no longer bounded by the limitations of his original form. He moved to the space between dimensions, a seething, formless chaos called the Nightmare Realm, and he has lived there essentially ever since, for 1 trillion years, waiting, looking for a way out. The Nightmare Realm, also called Dimension O, is one of the genuinely unsettling concepts at the heart of the show's mythology. It has no consistent physics. Nothing there behaves according to any rules that our minds are built to process. And it is pure chaos in the literal sense, not disordered, not merely random, but actively opposed to the existence of order. Bill described it as his own decaying dimension, and the description is apt. Even an entity as powerful as Bill Cipher found the Nightmare Realm inadequate. He was trapped in it. He could reach out, he could enter minds, he could make deals and whisper suggestions and manipulate events across the dimensional boundary, but he could not leave it. He was a consciousness without a body, power without form, will without substance. What he needed was a way in, a door between his dimension and a physical world, a portal. The history of his attempts to build one is a long and somewhat dark comedy of failed manipulation. Long before he ever encountered Ford Pines, Bill had tried to convince a Native American shaman named Modoc the Wise to build him a portal using materials from the physical world. Modoc worked on a prototype under Bill's direction and guidance. A twig-based construction, rudimentary and temporary, a first attempt at bridging the dimensional gap. The results were not reassuring. The prototype turned one man's face to stone. It created the bottomless pit that would later be incorporated into Stan's Mystery Shack exhibits. It briefly turned the sky red. It unleashed several entities on the nearby lakes that became local legends. Most significantly, one of Bill's own associates, a member of his inner circle of dimensional criminals, an entity named Chesilbrom, who would later become important to Ford's story, warned Modoc about what Bill was actually planning. She defected. That she told Modoc the truth and that the portal was not meant to benefit him or his people, that Bill's goal was to merge the Nightmare Realm with the physical world, and that the result would be catastrophic for every living being in the physical universe. Modoc listened. He turned against his muse, created the prophecy of the 10-symbol wheel that might one day stop Bill, and then killed himself by self-immolation, hoping his death would seal the dimensional opening. It worked for a while. The gap was closed. Bill was pushed back. He waited. He had time. He had 1 trillion years of practice at waiting. It was in 1982 that he heard something that made him laugh hard enough that the United States and the Soviet Union both picked up the readings of it. Someone had reversed Modoc's sealing spell. The dimensional boundary had been weakened. And the person who had done it was a brilliant, lonely, slightly paranoid physicist living in the woods of Oregon, who had found an ancient cave inscription describing an entity of boundless knowledge and had decided to read it aloud despite the warning at the bottom that said, very clearly, do not. That physicist's name was Stanford Pines. The relationship that followed is one of the most carefully constructed depictions of psychological manipulation in children's television. Bill presented himself to Ford as a muse, an inspiring presence, a being of pure intellect who had been watching Ford specifically for decades and found him uniquely extraordinary. He flattered Ford. He praised his work. He told him that he was the genius of the century, the one mind in 100 years that Bill had deemed worthy of partnership. And he helped Ford pass the research dead ends that had been blocking his progress. He suggested solutions that were elegant and correct. He made himself indispensable. Ford called him his muse. And while Ford was describing this partnership to anyone who would listen as an extraordinary meeting of minds, Bill was building the trust he needed to eventually ask Ford to do the one thing Bill needed done. Build the portal. We will come back to this. But for now, understand the scope of what Bill is. He is an entity who destroyed an entire universe because he felt out of place in it. He has been planning his entry into our physical world since before the Egyptian pyramids existed. His patience is geological. His capacity for manipulation is matched only by his genuine contempt for the people he manipulates. Now, he finds them amusing the way a cat finds a mouse amusing, right up until the moment he doesn't anymore. The yellow triangle with the top hat is not whimsy. He was designed to look approachable, to look funny, to look like the kind of villain a child can laugh at and feel safe from. That design is itself a manipulation. The show knows this. It is using Bill's appearance against you the same way Bill uses charm against his victims. He looks like a joke. He is not a joke. He destroyed an entire dimension and called it liberation, and then laughed about it for 1 trillion years. Section 5. Ford and Bill. The first time Ford Pines summoned Bill Cipher into his mind, he was standing in a cave in the woods of Gravity Falls, having just read an inscription on the wall that explicitly told him not to do what he was about to do. This is a very human thing to do. The warning is right there. The consequences are described in the inscription itself, and Ford read it, understood it, weighed it against his own desperate need for answers, and decided that surely the warning was for other people. People who lacked his training and his intelligence and his very specific understanding of what he was dealing with. He read it aloud. Bill arrived in his mind looking like exactly what he wanted to look like. A friendly, eccentric, slightly odd presence. A triangular entity with a top hat and a cheerful manner and an absolute waterfall of flattery directed specifically at Ford. Bill told him that he inspired one genius per century and that Ford was this century's choice. He told Ford that what he was doing in Gravity Falls was extraordinary, unprecedented. That's the most exciting research he had ever had the privilege of observing. He told Ford that he had been watching him for a while, that he had seen his potential long before Ford had even arrived in Oregon. Every word was calculated. Every compliment was a brick in the foundation of something much darker. The friendship, for Ford, was genuine. He was a man who had been isolated his entire life, isolated by his intelligence, isolated by his physical difference, isolated by the paranoid secrecy that his research had required. He had, in the years since his arrival in Gravity Falls, driven away nearly everyone who might have been close to him. His relationship with his brother Stan had been destroyed before he even left New Jersey. His research partner, Fiddleford McGucket, was still present. But Ford's increasingly erratic behavior under Bill's influence was straining that relationship past its limits. He was alone in a very deep way, and then this entity arrived who seemed to understand him completely and appreciate him unconditionally. Bill could enter Ford's mind only with Ford's consent. This is one of the key rules of his power. He cannot possess a mind without permission. He told Ford that giving him access to his mind was simply a sign of intellectual openness, a necessary condition for their collaboration. Nothing to be worried about. Ford agreed. He shook hands with the Dream Demon and invited him in, and for a while things seemed to go remarkably well. Ford's research accelerated dramatically. The breakthroughs came faster than they ever had before. Bill provided inspiration, suggested approaches, that guided Ford toward discoveries that would have taken him years to reach independently. The portal began to take real shape. The technical specifications that would eventually fill the pages of Journal 2 were partly Bill's intellectual contribution, directed through Ford's mind like water through a hose, shaped into plans that Ford was only too happy to take credit for. But Fiddleford McGucket was seeing things. He was noticing that Ford was acting strangely, not in the ways that brilliant obsessive researchers typically act strangely, but in deeper and more troubling ways. Ford's eyes sometimes changed when he was deep in thought. He would make suggestions that seemed to come from somewhere other than his own reasoning. There was something in the way he talked about the portal, not just with excitement, but with a kind of devotion that felt misplaced for a scientist discussing a machine. When the portal was nearly complete and its first test run was conducted, the test dummy got pulled through the opening before the safety protocols had been properly engaged. Fiddleford went in after it and was briefly dragged through. He saw what was on the other side. Whatever he saw, it broke something in him. He came back screaming, and nothing Ford said was adequate to reassure him. Fiddleford had glimpsed the nightmare realm. He had seen what was waiting on the other side of the dimensional door they were building, and he understood with absolute clarity what the portal was actually for. He quit the project immediately. He begged Ford to abandon it. He told Ford that whatever he thought he was building, whatever he thought the purpose was, how he was wrong. Ford didn't listen. He had Bill's voice in his head telling him that Fiddleford was being irrational, that the brief exposure to dimensional energy had simply overwhelmed him, that the portal was a triumph on the verge of completion, and walking away now would be an act of cowardice dressed up as wisdom. What Ford didn't know, and what Fiddleford had somehow intuited from his glimpse through the portal, was that Bill's goal was not collaboration. Bill's goal was not a partnership of equals working toward shared discovery. Bill's goal was to use the portal to bring the nightmare realm into contact with the physical world and merge them. Weirdmageddon, a total dissolution of the boundary between chaos and reality, the end of the stable physical universe as any living being could survive within it. Ford eventually realized this. It took longer than it should have, and the realization came through a combination of his own growing suspicion and a confrontation with Bill that left no room for comfortable interpretation. Bill dropped the friendly muse persona when it stopped being useful. He told Ford what the portal was really for. He made it clear that Ford's role was not partner but instrument. Ford was horrified. He was at this point genuinely one of the most intelligent people on Earth, with years of specialized knowledge in dimensional physics and supernatural phenomena, and he had been completely and thoroughly deceived by a geometric shape in a hat. The flattery, the praise, the carefully constructed sense of unique connection, all of it had been a mechanism, as precise and purposeful as any machine Ford had ever built. Much Bill had studied him, found his weaknesses, and used them. The six-fingered oddity who had never quite felt understood had been offered a version of understanding that was entirely fabricated, and he had accepted it with both hands. What Ford did next is actually admirable, in the context of how badly he had already failed. He began trying to stop what he had started. He installed a metal plate in his head to prevent Bill from possessing him directly. He created a device called Project Mentum that could bioelectrically encrypt his thoughts, making his mind harder for Bill to read. He started writing his research in invisible ink. He hid the journals, taking them apart, distributing them, putting them in places where they couldn't easily be reassembled. He tried to build in fail-safes, protections, mechanisms for someone to eventually undo what he had done. And then his brother Stan showed up. The story of what happened the night Ford fell through the portal is one of the most devastating sequences of events in the show, because it is entirely the result of accumulated miscommunication, misplaced pride, and the specific kind of damage that can only be done between two people who love each other and have spent years at cross purposes. It deserves its own section, and it will get one. But for now, understand this. Ford spent more than 30 years between dimensions. 30 years wandering through alternate realities while his twin brother Stan, the man he had resented and blamed, and spent the better part of a decade refusing to speak to, worked every single day from the research facility in Gravity Falls to bring him home. Stan didn't know if Ford was alive. He didn't know if the portal worked. He didn't know anything except that his brother had fallen through a machine and he was the last person who could plausibly do something about it. The friendship between Ford and Bill is not a friendship. It never was. But it is a perfect case study in how manipulation works, and the show gives it this much depth deliberately. Because Ford is not stupid. Ford is extraordinarily intelligent. And Ford got played anyway. Because intelligence has nothing to do with it. The vulnerabilities that Bill exploited in Ford, isolation, the need for validation, the hunger to be recognized as exceptional, the loneliness of spending your whole life feeling like you don't quite fit, those are not weaknesses of intelligence. They are conditions of being human. Is anyone sufficiently isolated, sufficiently starved for genuine connection, is potentially susceptible to someone who arrives offering exactly what they need. The smarter you are, the more elaborate the justifications you can construct for the choices you're making. That is what the show is saying with Ford and Bill. Not that Ford was foolish. That we are all potentially Ford. Section 6. The Portal and the Fall. In the basement of the Mystery Shack, behind a vending machine that dispenses nothing, through a hidden passage that generations of Gravity Falls tourists never found, there is a portal. It is enormous, far too large to fit in what should be available space, operating on principles that make the geometry of the building around it functionally impossible. It is made of metal and cable and interdimensional theory, and when it is fully activated, it creates an opening in the fabric between our world and whatever is beyond it. For 30 years, this portal sat dormant. For 30 years, Stanley Pines, running the Mystery Shack under his brother's identity, charging tourists to look at fake exhibits one floor above a machine that could end the world, worked to bring it back to life. To understand why and what it cost, we need to go back to the night it was built. Ford and his brother Stan had been estranged since their late teenage years. The break between them was sudden and catastrophic, and like most catastrophic breaks, the product of smaller failures that had been building for years. Ford was the brilliant one. Everyone could see it. Their father, Philbrick, could see it, and he funneled everything, attention, money, aspiration, hope, toward his gifted son while paying considerably less attention to the other one. Stan was funny and street smart and loyal in a way that went unrecognized, and he spent his adolescence living in the shadow of someone he both loved and envied. When Ford won a science fair with a perpetual motion machine and earned a scholarship to the prestigious West Coast Tech, the future looked clear and shining for both of them in different ways. Ford would go to school, get his degree, pursue his research. Stan would find his own path. They were brothers, and they had made a promise to each other as children, standing beside a boat they'd found on the glass shard beach. The words Stano Wars painted on its hull. They had dreamed together of sailing around the world someday. And it was the kind of childhood promise that feels absolutely binding at the time. Then Stan accidentally broke Ford's perpetual motion machine during an argument, just bumped into it, knocked it off its display, and it shattered. Ford's scholarship depended on that machine working for his teacher to see. Without it, the scholarship was gone. Without the scholarship, West Coast Tech was gone. And somehow, in the heat of the moment, Ford's anger at Stan for breaking the machine transmuted into something larger and more unfair. A kind of resentment at Stan for being the kind of person who broke things, for being present at the wrong moment, for being Stan rather than the twin that people actually expected things from. Their father threw Stan out of the house the next day. Not because of the machine, because Stan had been caught running a street scam of some kind, and this was the excuse Philbrick needed to discharge his disappointment. Stan was 17, and he was out, and Ford did not intervene. That is the wound. Ford, who had always defended Stan against everything, who had been his protector and his friend, watched his brother get thrown out into the world with nothing and said nothing, did nothing, because he was angry and hurt, and perhaps also just a little relieved that Stan's shadow was finally going to move away from his path. Years passed. Ford went to school, graduated early, got his doctorate, came to Gravity Falls. Stan drifted. He ran scams in states across the country, got arrested in several of them, got banned from dozens of others by various legal processes. He sold fake products, operated cons, lived out of motels, and borrowed money, and was, by most external measures, a failure. But he kept moving, which is something. Eventually, Stanford sent Stan a postcard. Not a warm one. Not a let's reconnect postcard. A desperate plea, I need help. Come to Gravity Falls. I need you to take something and go as far away as possible. Stan came. Of course he came. Whatever had happened between them, whatever Stan had spent years feeling about his brother, he came. What he found was a man who had been spending 6 years living alone in the woods of Oregon while being psychologically managed by an interdimensional demon, and who had consequently become nearly unrecognizable. Ford was paranoid, exhausted, barely holding it together. He showed Stan the research lab. He showed him the portal. Yet he gave him Journal 1 and told him to take it far away, bury it, never let anyone use it to restart the machine. But he didn't explain why. He didn't tell Stan about Bill. He didn't tell Stan what the portal was actually for or why it was dangerous. He just told Stan to take the journal and leave, and the implication, unstated but devastating, was that this was still just Stan being useful rather than Ford wanting him there. Stan had not come all the way to Oregon after 10 years of silence to be handed a task and sent away again. He was angry. They argued. During the argument, Stan reached for the journal. To do what exactly, even he might not have been sure. And there was a physical struggle that knocked them both around the room. Bumped equipment, triggered something, like the portal whirred to life with a mechanical inevitability that had nothing to do with intent. Ford was too close to the activation field. Stan reached for him and missed, and Ford was pulled in. Stan stood in the empty lab, alone, with Journal 1 and no idea what to do with it. He did not leave. This is the thing that has to be said clearly. Stan, who had been dismissed and overlooked and told to leave, who had every conceivable reason to take the journal and do exactly what his brother had asked and walk away and never look back, did not leave. He stayed. Because Ford was in there somewhere, and even after everything, Stan was not capable of abandoning him. He renamed himself Stanford Pines. He faked the death of Stanley Pines with a car crash, because a dead man can't be held responsible for mortgage payments or outstanding warrants in 32 states. He told the people of Gravity Falls that he was the brilliant researcher who lived in the woods, and they believed him because they had never met the real Stanford Pines. He converted the research lab into a tourist attraction, charged admission, and used every dollar he made to try to understand the portal well enough to restart it. Without Journals 2 and 3, he couldn't complete the sequence. He searched for them for decades. He kept the lie going. He kept the light on. Every night, Stan went into the basement and worked on the machine that might bring his brother back, while one floor above him, the Mystery Shack generated the money that kept the lights on. While tourists paid to look at fake exhibits that funded the one real exhibit in the building, the hidden portal that no one was supposed to know about. He did this for 30 years. When Dipper and Mabel arrive in Gravity Falls in the summer of 2012, Stan already has Journals 1 and 2. He found Journal 2 years earlier. He doesn't have Journal 3 until Dipper finds it in the tree and brings it home, and by the time the first season reaches its climax, Stan has all 3 journals and knows, finally, how to activate the portal at full power. In the Season 1 finale, he does. The portal activates. The dimensional boundary opens. And out of it, after 30 years of exile among dozens of alternate realities, steps a hooded figure with 6 fingers on each hand, blinking in the light of a lab that is simultaneously very familiar and profoundly strange. Stanford Pines has come home, and the first thing he does is punch his brother in the face for turning the portal on. Section 7. Stan's 30-year lie. Let's be precise about what Stanley Pines did. He assumed his brother's identity. He forged documents. He faked his own death. He deceived an entire town for 3 decades about who he fundamentally was. He lied to every person he met. He lied to the government agents who eventually investigated him. He lied to his own great-niece and nephew, who came to stay with him in the summer of 2012, genuinely trusting that they knew who they were living with. He also spent 30 years of his life in absolute, unrelenting devotion to the task of saving his brother. He had no guarantee it would work. He had no guarantee Ford was even alive. He worked on the portal with incomplete information, with journals he had to steal and scheme to obtain, with financial resources generated by running the most creatively fraudulent tourist attraction in the Pacific Northwest, with the specific kind of stubborn refusal to accept impossibility that is either heroic or delusional, depending on the day. Stan is the character that holds Gravity Falls together emotionally. Not Ford, who is brilliant and tragic in ways that are easy to articulate. Not Dipper, who is our point of view character and the person whose curiosity drives the plot. Stan, because Stan is doing something that has no obvious category. He is not a hero in any conventional sense. His methods are dishonest, his cover story has real victims. His relationship with the truth is essentially adversarial on a good day. But his underlying motivation is one of the purest things in the show, and the show insists on letting you hold both things at once. The tension between what Stan is doing and why he is doing it becomes the central dramatic engine of the Season 2 episode Not What He Seems, which is widely considered one of the finest single episodes of animated television in the modern era. In that episode, government agents finally close in on Stan, armed with evidence of his fraudulent identity and the fact that he has been collecting radioactive material, which is what he needed to power the portal. And there is a moment where Dipper and Mabel, having discovered proof that the man they thought was their great uncle is not who he said he is, have to make a choice. The portal has been activated. The gravitational anomalies are happening. Objects are floating through the mystery shack. Ford's warnings from Journal 1 are flashing through everyone's mind. And Dipper and Mabel have to decide whether to trust Stan or not, in the middle of all of it, with incomplete information and a great deal at stake and a timer counting down. Mabel chooses to trust him. She is not choosing to believe he hasn't lied. She knows he has lied. She is choosing to believe that underneath the lie there is something worth trusting. She holds the dial that can stop the portal. She lets go. The portal opens. Ford comes home. And then Stan has to explain 30 years of theft and deception to his brother, to his great-niece and nephew, to everyone. What comes out of those explanations across several episodes? That is a portrait of a specific kind of love, the kind that is expressed not through words or warmth, but through action, persistence, and a willingness to carry an impossible weight for as long as it takes. Stan never told anyone what he was doing in the basement because he couldn't. The secret had to be total, or it wouldn't work. But every dollar the Mystery Shack generated, every tourist he overcharged, every fake exhibit he maintained, every night he spent in the basement working on a machine whose principles he barely understood, all of it was an act of devotion to a brother who had, by any reasonable accounting, treated him terribly. Ford did not make it easy, even after he came back. He was furious that Stan had activated the portal. Because activating the portal had created an interdimensional rift, a crack in the boundary between our world and the nightmare realm. And that rift was exactly what Bill needed to bring Weirdmageddon about. 30 years of Stan's sacrifice, done in ignorance of the full picture, had inadvertently set in motion the exact catastrophe Ford had been trying to prevent. The brothers had to work through this. They had decades of accumulated grievance and guilt and misunderstanding to sort through, and the show doesn't let them resolve it cleanly or quickly. Their reconciliation is messy and painful and real in the way that reconciliations between people with very old wounds tend to be real. There is a scene where they sit together on a beach near the end and finally talk, really talk, about what happened in New Jersey all those years ago. And it is one of the most emotionally precise pieces of writing the show offers. What the show is doing with Stan's lie is something specific and thoughtful. It is not saying that deception is acceptable. It is not saying that the ends justify the means in a simple way. It is saying that people are complicated, that the same action can have a despicable surface and an extraordinary interior, and that understanding a person fully requires understanding both. Stan lied to everyone. Stan also spent 30 years of his life trying to bring his brother back from a dimensional exile because he could not live with having been the person who let him go. He is not a good person in the conventional sense, that he is a great one in a different sense, the sense that has to do with what you do when the cost is everything and the reward is uncertain, and you do it anyway. There is a broader implication in his story that the show returns to throughout its run. The adults in Dipper and Mabel's lives, Stan, Ford, McGucket, all made serious mistakes. They all deceived people they cared about, in some cases catastrophically. The show does not excuse these mistakes, but it does ask its young audience to understand them. It is asking 12-year-olds to sit with the complexity of adults who are flawed and who love them anyway, and to understand that those two things are not contradictions. That was a genuinely unusual thing to ask of a children's audience, and the show asked it without apology. Ogstan's lie is not the darkness at the center of Gravity Falls. It is part of what makes the show's darkness livable. Because underneath the lie is 30 years of love, and love, even imperfectly expressed, even obscured by layers of deception and fraud and criminal activity, is still love. Section 8 Nemas, Fiddleford McGucket. There is a junkyard on the edge of Gravity Falls that is, in the early episodes of the series, home to a wild-haired, wild-eyed old man who builds robots and builds elaborate mechanical constructions, and sometimes builds nothing at all and just sits and makes incomprehensible sounds. The locals call him Old Man McGucket. Most people assume he has always been this way. He is the town eccentric, the local colorful figure. The kind of person that small towns seem to produce and tolerate in ways that cities generally don't. He has not always been this way. What happened to Fiddleford Hadron McGucket is one of the most genuinely harrowing arcs in the entire show, and understanding it changes what you see every time he appears on screen, even in the early episodes when he is simply comic relief. Fiddleford McGucket was, at the point of his greatest achievement, one of the most brilliant engineers and inventors in the world. He grew up in the American South, a mechanic by instinct and training, with a gift for understanding machines that was both intuitive and technically precise. He attended Backupsmore University sometime in the 1970s, where he met Stanford Pines during one of Ford's grad school years. The two became friends, bonded by a shared enthusiasm for doing things that other people considered impossible. Fiddleford had, by the time Ford reached out to him, already built a prototype personal computer in his garage in Palo Alto, California. This was before the personal computer industry existed in any commercial sense. He was genuinely ahead of his time, working on technology that the rest of the world would take decades to make standard. He had a wife. He had a son named Tate. He had a life that was, by any reasonable measure, going well. Ford called him. "Come to Gravity Falls. There's something extraordinary happening here. I could use your help on a project." And Fiddleford said yes, because Fiddleford was a man who said yes to extraordinary things, and because Ford was his friend, and because the invitation felt like an adventure. But he arrived to find Ford already deep in his collaboration with Bill Cipher, though he didn't know that's what it was. He just knew that Ford was behaving strangely, and that the project he'd been brought in to help with, the interdimensional portal, was both the most technically impressive thing he had ever seen and, increasingly, something that gave him an uneasy feeling he couldn't quite articulate. He built the prototype laptop that would be used to manage the portal's operating systems, working from Ford's technical specifications and trusting that his friend understood what he was doing. The test run happened. The dummy was pulled through. Fiddleford went in after it and was briefly inside the portal before Ford pulled him back out. What Fiddleford saw in those seconds has never been shown directly on screen, but we know it was the Nightmare Realm, or a glimpse of its edge. We know it involved Bill Cipher, the Gravity Falls wiki notes that he glimpsed Bill removing his own exoskeleton as if it were a costume, which is a detail that does not belong anywhere near a children's cartoon, and yet is apparently canonical. Whatever it was, Fiddleford came back understanding things that Ford had not yet accepted. That the portal was not going to benefit anyone, that Bill's involvement was not benign, and that what waited on the other side of that dimensional door was catastrophic. He begged Ford to stop. Ford refused. Fiddleford quit the project and left. But he couldn't leave the memories. They were already in him, the things he'd seen, and they wouldn't stay still. He couldn't sleep without seeing them. He couldn't focus on anything else. The images came back in the quiet moments, in the moments between thoughts, and they were things that a human mind was not built to hold. He invented the memory gun. He invented it for himself, initially. He just wanted not to see those things anymore. He used it to erase the specific memories of what he'd glimpsed through the portal, and the relief was immediate and profound. For the first time in weeks, he could sleep. He could think about something other than the nightmare realm. The device worked. He used it again and again. Each time he encountered something in Gravity Falls, because the town kept generating encounters, that was its nature, he reached for the gun. Each use left a small gap in his memory, but each gap came with relief, and the relief was addictive in the way that only relief from genuine horror can be addictive. But the side effects built slowly. Repeated use of the memory gun caused cumulative neurological damage. By the time Fiddleford had been using it for several months, the damage was already beyond what could be called minor. Words started slipping away from him. Memories he hadn't intended to erase began going with the ones he had. His personality started to blur. The careful, precise engineer who could wire a prototype computer in his garage was becoming someone who couldn't always remember where he'd left his shoes. He kept using it, because stopping meant remembering, and remembering meant dealing with what was in there, and he had decided, somewhere in his reasoning, that forgetting was the kindest thing he could do for himself. In the process of founding the Society of the Blind Eye, which we'll discuss in the next section, and he provided the memory gun's technology to an organization of people who wanted to make similar trades, their memories of the supernatural, in exchange for not having to deal with what those memories meant. He thought he was helping. He genuinely thought he was offering people a service, a way to live in a town that generated impossible experiences without being destroyed by them. What he was actually building was a mechanism for the systematic suppression of the truth about Gravity Falls, which suited Bill's long-term plans perfectly and was part of the reason Bill had allowed Fiddleford to leave in the first place. By the time Dipper and Mabel arrive in Gravity Falls in the summer of 2012, Old Man McGucket has no memory of anything that happened before 1982. He has no memory of being an engineer or an inventor, yet he has no memory of Ford, or the portal, or the society he founded. He lives in a junkyard, builds things compulsively because the muscle memory is still there, even when the conscious memory isn't, and has the air of a man who is somehow both entirely present and fundamentally absent. When Dipper and Mabel eventually help him recover his memories, in the episode Society of the Blind Eye, the moment of recovery is not triumphant. It is heartbreaking. Because the memories he gets back are not pleasant ones. They include everything he was trying to forget. They include the things he saw through the portal. They include the realization that his attempt to help people forget things had been co-opted into a system of control that he never intended. They include 30 years of lost time, but they also include the memory of who he was. Yup, the engineer, the inventor, the man who worked on something genuinely extraordinary and walked away when it became clear that extraordinary could also mean monstrous. Fiddleford McGucket at 30 was a man who saw something true and acted on it, even at tremendous personal cost. That matters. The fact that he then spent decades erasing himself doesn't erase what he did before he did that. In the aftermath of Weirdmageddon, Fiddleford recovers enough to market his patents to the US government and becomes, somewhat improbably, extremely wealthy. He uses that wealth to purchase Northwest Manor from Preston Northwest, who has lost the family fortune by trusting Bill Cipher. Old Man McGucket, the junkyard hermit, is the new owner of the most elaborate mansion in Gravity Falls. There is a specific justice to this that the show doesn't underline heavily, but which rewards attention. The man who lost everything because he saw the truth and couldn't live with it ends up in the end materially better off than the man who collaborated with Bill willingly for personal gain. Fiddleford's arc is not a neat vindication. He still lost 30 years. He still lost his wife, his son's respect, his own sense of self. The mansion doesn't give those back, but it is something. It is evidence that the show doesn't forget what happened to him and doesn't let the damage go unremarked. Section 9. The Society of the Blind Eye beneath the Gravity Falls Museum of History, through a passageway concealed behind a fireplace in the eye exhibit, which is a detail so on the nose that it circles back around to being unsettling. There is a chamber. The chamber is lit by warm amber light from sconces mounted on old stone walls. Robed figures assemble here. They have a ritual. They have a symbol, an eye with a line through it. They have a machine that removes memories and stores them in glass tubes. They have been operating, at the time of the show, for more than 30 years. The Society of the Blind Eye was founded by Fiddleford McGucket in 1982, 17 days after he first used the memory gun on himself. The name tells you exactly what the organization was originally supposed to be about: choosing not to see, choosing to look away. Fiddleford had found a method of not seeing that worked, at considerable personal cost, and he wanted to offer the same thing to the other residents of Gravity Falls who had witnessed things they didn't want to carry. His logic was not entirely wrong as far as it went. Gravity Falls generates impossible experiences for its residents on a fairly regular basis. Gnomes in someone's yard, a time traveler appearing briefly at a town event, the gobblewonker in the lake. The Summerween trickster, an apparently sentient pile of interdimensional garbage. Most small towns don't have mechanisms for processing this kind of ongoing weirdness, and most people, confronted with evidence that the world is significantly stranger than they understood, do not respond with scientific curiosity and careful note-taking. They respond with fear, confusion, disrupted sleep, and a general deterioration of their ability to function in normal daily life. The Society offered them a way out. Come to us with your supernatural memory, and we'll remove it. You won't have to carry it anymore. You won't dream about it. You won't feel the edges of it pressing against the normal world when you're trying to eat breakfast or help with homework or do all the ordinary things that feel hollow when you know extraordinary things. We'll just take it away. You'll feel better. They did feel better. Most of them, for a while. What went wrong with the Society of the Blind Eye is a fairly precise illustration of how good intentions become systems of control. The original membership were, for the most part, genuinely traumatized people looking for relief. Over time, as Fiddleford's mind deteriorated and he ceased to be the operational force behind the organization, new leadership emerged in the form of a man known as Blind Ivan. Ivan was different from Fiddleford. Ivan had no particular trauma to process. What Ivan saw in the Society was power, the power to control what the citizens of Gravity Falls remembered, and therefore what they were capable of acting on. Under Ivan's leadership, the Society's criterion for erasing someone's memory shifted subtly. It went from, would this person like their memory erased, to, does this person having this memory inconvenience our operations? Lazy Susan saw gnomes and was swept up before she could tell anyone. Others had memories removed without full consent, or with consent extracted under circumstances that made consent functionally meaningless. The Society had become, quietly, a censorship organization disguised as a relief service. What the show does brilliantly with this is resist the temptation to make the Society's membership obviously villainous. When their robes come off, the members are revealed to be Toby Determined, the local gossip columnist, Bud Gleeful, Gideon's father, an ordinary man who had made the somewhat unusual decision to marry a woodpecker, which the Society was presumably responsible for him not remembering had happened. These are not evil people. They are people who found in the Society a community, a sense of purpose, a framework for understanding the strangeness of their town. And they kept using the gun on themselves because that was what membership looked like. And the cumulative damage was making them all a little stranger and a little more detached. The episode that reveals all of this, Society of the Blind Eye, Season 2, Episode 7, is the best episode of the first half of Season 2, and it does its work quietly and precisely. Dipper, Mabel, Suze, and Wendy discover the Society while trying to recover McGucket's memories, and what they find is not a secret cabal of sophisticated conspirators, but a sad collection of frightened people who found a way to avoid facing things and kept using it past the point of wisdom. McGucket's confrontation with Blind Ivan, when he leaps in to protect the others and takes a full power blast from the memory gun directly, has one of the most quietly devastating lines in the show. He doesn't fall. He looks at Ivan and says, "Take your best shot, Baldy. But my mind's been gone for 30 years. You can't break what's already broken." The irony of the scene is that Ivan uses the Society's own weapon to erase the members' memories of having been part of it, so they go back to their ordinary lives without even the community the Society offered them. He gives them exactly what they gave everyone else, the removal of an inconvenient truth. And Blind Ivan himself, who used the gun so many times as part of his administrative duties, suffers long-term memory loss that mirrors McGucket's, because there is no version of repeated memory erasure that ends well. The symbol of the Society, that crossed-out eye, appears on walls and surfaces throughout Gravity Falls well before the society itself is revealed. The show planted it in the scenery the same way it planted the Bill Cipher wheel in the opening credits, trusting that someone would notice and file it away for when the answer arrived. In Journal 3, Ford had noted the symbol and written a decoded cipher message expressing his suspicion that it was the work of Fiddleford. The message reads, "If my suspicions are correct, this is the work of Fiddleford. Does he really have to go to such great lengths to forget?" The answer is yes, he really did. And the question of whether that was the right choice, whether forgetting catastrophic things is sometimes the only survivable option, is one the show never quite resolves. It lets it hang in the air, unanswered, because the honest answer is complicated, and the show is honest. But the Society of the Blind Eye is also connected to a specific detail in the credits that extends the mythology beyond the television series. A memory canister visible in the Hall of the Forgotten is labeled with the name Jeffrey Canuck. No character named Jeffrey Canuck ever appears in the show. No explanation is ever given for why his memories were stored. This is one of several details that fans have noted as deliberate loose ends, reminders that Gravity Falls has a history that extends beyond what was ever shown, that the town has been doing this for a long time, and that not all of its secrets have been told. Section 10. Dipper and Mabel. We have spent several sections now in the deep mythology, in the backstory and the history and the decades-long secrets. Let's come back to the surface for a moment. Tonight, let's talk about the two people the show is actually about. Dipper and Mabel Pines are 12 years old at the start of the series, turning 13 in its finale. They are twin siblings, fraternal rather than identical, which in the show's mythology matters. The show is full of twins, and the relationship between twins is one of its central preoccupations. They are each other's first frame of reference and their most enduring anchor, the person who was there before memory started and will still be there when everything else has changed. Dipper, whose real first name is Mason and whose nickname comes from a birthmark on his forehead shaped like the Big Dipper constellation, is the character Alex Hirsch made from his own childhood self-image. He is curious, analytical, slightly anxious, perpetually convinced that there is an explanation for everything and that he will find it if he just looks hard enough and thinks carefully enough and pays enough attention. He is not wrong about this, exactly. He does find explanations. But the show is also interested in what happens to him when the explanations turn out to be bigger and darker than he was prepared for. Dipper's central journey in the series is about the gap between wanting to know things and being ready to know them. He finds Journal 3 and immediately wants to understand everything in it, and the show rewards that impulse. The journal is real, the creatures are real, the mysteries are genuine. But it also shows him, repeatedly, that knowledge comes with weight. That knowing about the portal, knowing about Bill, knowing about Ford's history and Stan's lie and what's actually happening beneath the surface of this seemingly funny small town is not the same as being equipped to handle what you know. He grows across the series in ways that are earned and visible and real. And the version of Dipper who faces Weirdmageddon is demonstrably different from the version who found the journal in a tree on his first day. Mabel is the character that takes more work to understand because she looks simpler than she is. On the surface, she is pure comic energy. The sweaters, the bedazzler, the pig, the string of ludicrous crushes, the endless enthusiasm for anything craft-related or animal-related or party-related. She is funny in a very particular way that requires total commitment and zero ironic distance, which is a harder kind of funny to sustain than it looks. But Mabel is also the show's emotional center in a way that isn't always obvious. She is the character who keeps human connection at the center of everything, the character who will derail a practical plan to make sure someone doesn't feel left out, the character whose instinct to include and to love is both her most genuine quality and, occasionally, the source of real problems. In Season 2, her arc is partly about what happens when that instinct is manipulated. When someone finds the exact right way to appeal to Mabel's desire for things to be fine and uses it against her. Her moments of genuine strength in the series are often quiet ones. The moment in Not What He Seems when she chooses to trust Stan. At the moment in the finale when she refuses to abandon the human side of the plan, even when the cosmic side seems more important. The moment, early in the show, when she is asked to be the gnome's queen and absolutely refuses, and the reason she refuses is not fear, but a very clear-eyed assessment of her own worth. She knows she deserves better. She has always known that. What Alex Hirsch built with these two characters is something that television does not do especially often. Sibling intimacy without competition. Dipper and Mabel fight. They get on each other's nerves in the specific ways that only people who are constantly together can. But the underlying current of their relationship is not rivalry or resentment or the kind of casual cruelty that passes for sibling humor in a lot of fiction. It is genuine closeness. The kind that has its own language and its own history and its own shorthand. The kind that means, when the world is ending, you reach for each other first. The show's thesis, if it has one, might be this: that the summer Dipper and Mabel spend in Gravity Falls changes them in ways they can't fully anticipate, and that the thing that makes them capable of surviving those changes is that they never stop being each other's most important person. All the mythology, all the secrets, all the history, it is ultimately framing for a story about two kids who loved each other and who faced extraordinary things and came through it together. Dipper is based on Alex Hirsch. Mabel is based on his sister Ariel. The show's deepest emotional current is autobiographical. It is the story of how a specific childhood shaped a specific person, fictionalized into something bigger and stranger and more mythologically elaborate than any real summer could ever be. But the feelings inside it are the real ones. There is a reason Gravity Falls is still resonating with people more than a decade after it ended. Not just the ciphers, not just the mythology, not just Bill Cipher's incredible design. The reason is that Dipper and Mabel feel real in the specific way that fiction characters feel real when someone has put genuine memory into them. When you cry at the end of the show, and many people cry at the end of the show, it is not just for fictional characters in a fictional town. It is for something real that the show found words and images for. Something about what it means to be that age in that relationship, facing the end of a summer that meant everything. Section 11, The Creatures of Gravity, Falls. Gravity Falls, Oregon is haunted. Genuinely haunted in the sense that the Earth itself seems to generate strangeness. That the concentration of anomalous events in this small patch of the Pacific Northwest is genuinely without precedent anywhere in the world. Ford's research suggested something specific about the geography, the local geology, the history of the region, some confluence of factors that made Gravity Falls a nexus point, a location where the normal rules of physical reality applied loosely at best. What this meant practically was that Journal 3 was always going to need more pages. There is simply too much going on. Let's talk about some of the creatures and phenomena that populated this town because they deserve attention. And because several of them are significantly more interesting on second examination than they appear on first encounter. The gnomes. Every discussion of Gravity Falls creatures has to start with the gnomes, both because they appear first, in the very first episode, as the central threat, and because they are doing something specific and smart in terms of how the show introduces its mythology. They look silly. They are small, bearded, pointy-hatted, completely willing to stack themselves into a human-shaped pile and wear a trench coat to pass as a normal person. The episode uses them primarily for comedy, and they are very funny. But they are also a genuine threat. They are genuinely trying to kidnap Mabel and force her into a supernatural servitude arrangement. The show doesn't let the comedy obscure that completely. And the resolution of the gnome plotline, Mabel discovering that she can incapacitate them by using Stan's leaf blower to scatter them, is silly and satisfying, and also a demonstration that Mabel is considerably more capable than her initial appearance suggests. The gnomes reappear throughout the series, never quite reaching the level of actual menace again, but serving as a kind of baseline reminder that even the comic elements of Gravity Falls have an edge. They are not harmless. They are just outmatched by their current opposition. The shapeshifter, on the other hand, is one of the most genuinely terrifying things in the show. Ford built a bunker in the woods during his research years, and inside the bunker, he kept his most dangerous experiments under controlled conditions. The shapeshifter is one of them, an entity capable of perfect physical mimicry of any creature it has ever observed, including people. It is in the bunker when Dipper and Mabel find it in Season 2, contained but not incapacitated. and its escape attempt is one of the most unsettling sequences in the show. The creature moves through several different forms trying to find one that will give it an advantage, eventually settling on a grotesque, incomplete version of Dipper's own form. Creatures that can be anything are terrifying precisely because they destabilize the trust that identity normally provides. The journal notes on the shapeshifter include the phrase, "No prison can hold it," which is the kind of thing you write in a journal about a creature that you've managed to contain and hope never gets out. Time Baby is a different kind of creature entirely. An enormous infantile entity from the future who leads the Time Police, a temporal enforcement agency, and is apparently the supreme authority over time travel in the show's universe. He appears in the show's mythology mostly as an indication of scale. Here is an entity of enormous power, genuinely capable of serious damage and consequence, and Bill Cipher dismisses and apparently vaporizes him as if he's a minor inconvenience. This is meant to tell you exactly where Bill sits on the power scale. Whatever you thought was impressively powerful, Bill is above it. The Gremlin appears in an early episode and is significant primarily because it is the entity that first drove Fiddleford McGucket to use the memory gun on himself. He encountered it before the portal incident, and its reality was enough to start the pattern. The show is careful about this detail. McGucket's breakdown is not entirely Bill's fault. The groundwork was laid before Bill was ever in the picture, by an ordinary Gravity Falls creature doing ordinary Gravity Falls creature things, which was simply more than Fiddleford was equipped to absorb without assistance. The multi-bear is a bear with multiple heads who appears in one episode and is played entirely as a joke about masculinity and peer pressure, but is, if you look at it with the mythology in mind, another example of the casual impossibility that Gravity Falls residents have been living alongside for years. The multi-bear has been in the woods. The townspeople know about it in a vague way. Nobody seems especially alarmed. This is what years of supernatural normalization looks like. Yet the ghosts in Gravity Falls are not all the same. The ghost of the lumberjack who haunts Northwest Manor, who we'll discuss at length in a later section, is a fundamentally different entity from the ghosts in Headhunters, or the spectral presence in The Inconveniencing. Some of them have specific agendas, some of them are working out old business, some of them are, as Dipper learns to classify them, anywhere from Category 1, mildly annoying, not particularly powerful, to Category 10, which is what the lumberjack is, and which involves possessed taxidermy heads chanting ancient sins in unison while blood drips from their mouths. The tooth-filled man called the Summerween Trickster is one of the show's most purely horror-driven creatures. I'm a monster, built from the unwanted candy of 100 previous Halloweens who consumes people who don't appreciate the spirit of the holiday. It appears in the Summerween episode, which is the show's dedicated horror episode, and is genuinely effective as a horror entity before its origin is revealed, at which point it becomes primarily sad. Most of the show's monsters, once understood, are primarily sad. This is not an accident. The Northwest Mansion's paintings contain another strange detail. Among the family portraits is a significant and prominent image of Bill Cipher, which the episode frames as evidence that the Northwest family has had a relationship with Bill for quite a long time, long before Weirdmageddon, long before Ford. The depth of that history is never fully explored in the show, but it is one of those details that rewards attention and opens up implications that the narrative doesn't close. The animals of Gravity Falls behave strangely as a general rule, and this is one of the show's background running jokes. That is also, if you pay attention, a symptom of the town's fundamental weirdness. The gnomes communicate with woodland animals. The animals flee en masse when Weirdmageddon begins. Waddles the pig, who is simply Mabel's pet, nevertheless has a scene in Season 2 where he is temporarily given enhanced intelligence by a mind-swapping device and demonstrates that a genius pig's approach to problems is ultimately not that different from a normal pig's approach. This is funny. It is also a grace note in the show's ongoing meditation on what intelligence actually means and what it gets you. The creatures of Gravity Falls, as a category, serve a function beyond simply populating episodes with adventure. They are evidence that Ford was right. The town is extraordinary. Whatever is generating all of this strangeness is subtle and significant and far more fundamental to the town's nature than a century of residents who have been carefully forgetting what they've seen have been able to pretend. The journals are a record of something that was happening whether anyone was writing it down or not. Ford just had the nerve to look directly at it. Section 12. The Bill Cipher Wheel. Alright, let's talk about the wheel. In the Season 1 opening credits, there are about 2 seconds of footage showing a circular diagram with symbols arranged around a central triangular eye. We've mentioned it briefly before, taught in the context of the opening sequence's hidden layers. But the wheel deserves its own sustained examination, because understanding it changes how you read the whole show. The wheel is a prophecy. It is specifically the prophecy created by the Native American shaman, Modoc, who had his own encounter with Bill Cipher long before the Pines family, long before Ford, long before the portal. Modoc built a twig prototype portal for Bill, saw what happened when it was partially activated, was warned by Bill's associate Chesselbrom that Bill's intentions were not benign, and turned against his would-be patron. Before committing self-immolation in the hope that his death would seal the dimensional rift, Modoc created a prophecy. The prophecy was this: 10 people, each associated with one of 10 specific symbols, I could join hands in a circle and destroy Bill Cipher. The 10 symbols are the ones on the wheel: the pine tree for Dipper, the shooting star for Mabel, the glasses for McGucket, the six-fingered hand for Ford, the question mark for Suze, the crescent moon and star for Gideon, the bag of ice for Wendy, the llama for Pacifica, the pentagram for Robbie, and the heart for Stan. Every single one of these characters is connected to Gravity Falls. Every single one of them is present in the town during the events of the show. The prophecy describes the specific group of people who will be present for the show's climax as if it was written with knowledge of the future, which is either an extraordinary coincidence or evidence that the show's mythology operates on principles of temporal causality that we're not meant to fully understand. What makes the wheel so satisfying as a narrative device is the way it transforms the peripheral characters. Pacifica Northwest goes from being the mean rich girl antagonist to being a literal piece of a cosmic prophecy. Robbie Valentino, Wendy's ex-boyfriend who serves as minor comic relief for most of the show, is a necessary element of the one strategy that could defeat a trillion-year-old interdimensional chaos entity. Even Gideon, the child villain who spent most of Season 1 trying to destroy the Pines family, is part of the mechanism of their salvation. The wheel makes everyone matter, and then the show doesn't use it, not directly. In the finale, when the survivors have gathered, and Ford reveals the prophecy and they form the circle and prepare to join hands, Gideon and Stan refuse to shake each other's hand due to accumulated grievance. The circle breaks. The prophecy fails. Bill destroys the wheel formation. And the heroes are left to find another way. This is not a narrative failure. It is the show being honest about what prophecies actually do in a world occupied by complicated people with complicated relationships. The theory is beautiful. The practice is that Stan and Gideon have too much bad history, in a moment of extreme stress, to put it aside for a ritual they only half believe in. The prophecy doesn't account for human stubbornness. Modoc, who died thousands of years ago in an act of self-sacrifice, they could not have anticipated that the two most grudge-holding people in the circle would be standing next to each other. What replaces the prophecy, ultimately, is something more personal and less mythological. The solution to Bill Cipher is not an ancient ritual or a cosmic weapon. It is a set of twin brothers, a stolen identity, a sacrifice, and the particular kind of love that has been the emotional center of the show all along. We'll get to that. But the wheel is important context for understanding that the show was always building towards something specific, and always aware that the something specific would not unfold neatly. The wheel also tells you, if you can read it, that the people Modoc named were not chosen arbitrarily, but they were the people whose relationships with each other and with the town were load-bearing parts of what was happening. Every character connected to a symbol on the wheel is in the show's deeper structure, essential to what Gravity Falls is really about. The pine tree and the shooting star are the heart of it, but the glasses and the six-fingered hand are the history. The heart is the sacrifice. Together, they are the complete picture. When you see the wheel flash by in the opening credits now, knowing what it represents, it doesn't look like decoration. It looks like a blueprint. Section 13, Pacifica Northwest. Let's talk about inheritance. Pacifica Northwest is, at the beginning of her story in Gravity Falls, exactly what she appears to be, a rich, beautiful, entitled girl from the most prominent family in town who takes particular pleasure in making Mabel feel bad about herself. She is mean in the specific way that very comfortable people can be mean, the kind that is casual and reflexive rather than passionate, the kind that doesn't require real malice because the power differential does the work. She doesn't have to try very hard to hurt Mabel. She just has to be herself. In the Gulf War, the episode that comes before her central arc, something interesting begins to happen. Pacifica and Mabel end up in an improbable alliance against a population of tiny supernatural golf course inhabitants called Lilliputians, who have decided to murder Pacifica. And for a brief, significant moment, working together to escape certain death at miniature hands. They are just two 12-year-old girls who are discovering that the other is more complicated than they seemed. The truce is temporary. They are not friends at the end of the episode. But the show is establishing that Pacifica has enough interior complexity to justify further attention. The further attention arrives in Northwest Mansion Mystery. The setup is simple. The Northwest family's annual high society party is threatened by a supernatural disturbance that is becoming increasingly dangerous. Dipper is recruited, grudgingly, to deal with it, in exchange for bringing Mabel and her friends to the party. What he finds is a haunting. The ghost haunting Northwest Manor is the spirit of a lumberjack named Archibald Corduroy, who is, in a detail the show handles with typical elegant economy, an ancestor of Wendy Corduroy. 150 years earlier, the Northwest commissioned local lumberjacks to build their mansion on a specific hill. A hill the lumberjacks knew was dangerous but built on anyway because they needed the work. In exchange for the labor, the Northwest promised to hold an annual party to which the entire town would be invited. Not just the wealthy, not just the important, but everyone. The people who built the mansion would have the right to enjoy it. The Northwests broke that promise. They held the parties for the upper class only. And Archibald Corduroy, the lumberjack who had done the building and the negotiating, died in the construction and came back as a ghost who has been spending a century and a half turning party guests into wood in the hope that someone, eventually, will notice and fix it. What Pacifica discovers, over the course of the episode, is that her family's wealth and status are built on broken promises and exploitation. Not in an abstract ancestral sense, but specifically, documentably, literally haunted. The ghost is there because the wrong was done. The wrong is still wrong because no Northwest has ever acknowledged it. Every year of the party, every year of the exclusion, is another year of compounding the original failure. Her parents know this. They have always known this. They have known about the ghost, and about the promise, and about the lumberjack. And they have chosen to manage the secret rather than address it, because addressing it would cost them something. Pacifica discovers this mid-episode, and the moment is written with remarkable precision. Pacifica asks her father if they are bad people, and his answer is a masterpiece of deflection that does not actually deny the premise. The second piece of Pacifica's story is what Dipper and the audience learn about her parents' parenting methods. There is a scene in which her father rings a bell, and Pacifica, mid-sentence, mid-thought, goes still and silent and looks at her feet. Like a dog that's been trained, like a person who has been systematically taught that her own impulses are wrong and require immediate correction. The bell has been used on her for years. She doesn't do it consciously. She has internalized the correction so thoroughly that it doesn't need to be applied externally anymore. She applies it to herself. This is the kind of thing Gravity Falls puts in a children's show and trusts its audience to understand. The bell isn't explained. Nobody names what Pacifica's parents are doing. But the image is precise and devastating, and a child watching this who has a parent who uses similar mechanisms, different bells, different forms, same function, will recognize it without being able to say the word for it. Pacifica breaks the curse. She does the thing her parents are begging her not to do in the final moment, when the ghost has turned everyone into wood, and Dipper can't fix it, and the only solution is to open the manor gates and let the common folk of Gravity Falls into the party as promised. She opens the gates. The curse lifts. The lumberjack spirit passes on. And then, in the quiet after, she and Dipper stand on her parents' favorite carpet, and she deliberately tracks mud across it, and she is laughing, and Dipper is laughing with her. And it is one of the most perfectly crafted moments in the show, because what she's doing isn't vandalism, it's the smallest possible gesture of freedom. It's a 12-year-old girl discovering that the rules she's been taught to follow have always been someone else's rules, and that the world does not in fact end when you break them. After Weirdmageddon, the Northwest family loses their fortune. Preston Northwest had been collaborating with Bill Cipher, had offered to betray humanity in exchange for favor and position, and when Bill is defeated, that investment collapses. The mansion is sold. Pacifica attends Dipper and Mabel's birthday party and brings gifts she wrapped herself, and she jokes about it because she is learning to be a person outside of the family she was born into. She is not given a redemption arc in the traditional sense. The show doesn't decide that she was secretly good all along, or that her meanness was entirely her parents' fault and she bears no responsibility for it. Dipper calls her out on her past behavior, clearly and without softening, and the show endorses that. But it also shows that she is capable of change when change costs her something real. She opened the gates. That mattered. You are not your family. That is what Pacifica Northwest's story says. You can be shaped by them, defined by them, constrained by them, for years. But you are not them, and the moment you choose differently is the moment that becomes true. Section 14. Gideon Gleeful. The villain of the first season is a 9-year-old boy. Gideon Gleeful is the child star of a televised psychic act. The most popular performer in Gravity Falls, beloved by the town's adults for his cherubic appearance and his apparent access to supernatural insight. He performs at the Tent of Telepathy, a touring attraction that brings him into town regularly and has made him, by any reasonable measure, famous. He has enormous hair, an immaculate white suit, and the kind of smile that looks designed rather than felt. He is also in possession of Journal 2, which he stole from somewhere, and he has a genuine crush on Mabel Pines that rapidly becomes something considerably darker when Mabel declines to reciprocate. What makes Gideon interesting as a villain is how precisely the show understands what he actually is. He is not a supernatural threat, at least not initially. He is a child who has been given too much attention, too much deference, and too many adults around him who have decided that managing his ego is easier than correcting it. His father, Bud Gleeful, is a member of the Society of the Blind Eye, which is a detail that sits quietly in the background and connects Gideon's family to the show's broader mythology without ever being made explicit in the show itself. His mother appears to be fairly thoroughly under the control of both father and son in different ways. Gideon's show is a fraud. He doesn't have real psychic powers. He has Journal 2, and he uses information from it selectively to create the appearance of supernatural insight. This is the kind of observation that lands differently on repeat viewing because the show trusts you to make the connection without spelling it out. When Mabel turns him down, Gideon's response is to attempt to manipulate her, and then threaten Dipper, then try to use the information in Journal 2 to take over the Mystery Shack. He summons Bill Cipher, who greets the summons with a casual delight that suggests this is not the first time he has been called, and that he finds the caller somewhat beneath his attention, and makes a deal that involves Bill entering someone else's mind in exchange for Gideon keeping his amulet. The episode in which Gideon summons Bill, called Dreamscapers in Season 1, is the first episode in which Bill appears in the story in a meaningful way. His previous presence in the show has been entirely visual. That moment in the premiere with the eyes in the trees, the rug in the Mystery Shack, a brief flash during a credits sequence. Dreamscapers is where he speaks, where he moves, while where Alex Hirsch gives the performance that turns what could have been a creepy but minor antagonist into one of the most compelling villain introductions in animation. Bill walks through Stan's mind and catalogs it, observing Stan's memories and inner life with an unhurried curiosity that suggests he is genuinely interested in how people work, in the same way that a biologist might be genuinely interested in how an insect works before removing its wings. He is not malicious in Dreamscapers in the way he will be later. He is playful. He is charming. He is generous with his chaos in a way that is almost friendly, right up until it isn't. Gideon himself ends up in the Gravity Falls maximum security prison after his plans collapse. Season 2 eventually shows him navigating prison life, which he adapts to with a resourcefulness that is actually kind of impressive, making allies among the other inmates, and gradually being drawn back into the orbit of bigger events when Weirdmageddon begins, and the prison is damaged in the initial chaos. He ends the show as, tentatively and messily, something closer to a person than he was when it started. Not reformed exactly, not suddenly good, but capable of making different choices than the ones he had been making, which is sometimes the most realistic outcome. His arc, like Pacifica's, is about inheritance in a specific sense. He was created by the adults around him, by his father's complicity, by the town's willingness to indulge a child's apparent gifts without examining their source, by the absence of anyone who thought to say no. He is also, like Pacifica, given the opportunity to be something other than what he was made. He doesn't take it as cleanly. The road is longer and messier, but the show doesn't discard him. The bell that controls Pacifica and the deal that corrupts Gideon are doing the same work from different angles, showing what happens to children who are shaped by adults who prioritize their own interest over the child's actual well-being. Pacifica was shaped into obedience. Gideon was shaped into entitlement. Both of them arrived in the summer of 2012 as products of what was done to them, and both of them, by the end of the show, have had at least one moment of choosing differently. Section 15. Weirdmageddon. October 26, 2015. The 38th episode of Gravity Falls premieres on Disney XD. Weirdmageddon Part 1. Subtitled in the episode's encrypted title on Disney Plus as XPC VEAOQFOXSO, which is, if you apply a Caesar cipher, simply Weirdmageddon. The episode opens where the previous one left off. Bill Cipher has entered the physical world. He has a body. He is here, and the town of Gravity Falls has not been the same since. What Weirdmageddon looks like in practice is genuinely extraordinary for a Disney Channel animated show. 3 days into the event, Gravity Falls is unrecognizable. The sky above the town is torn, showing the nightmare realm behind it like a wound in reality, orange-red and churning. Eye bats, winged eyeballs, because Bill's imagery is nothing if not consistent, fly through the streets and petrify anyone they look at directly. Waves of weirdness energy sweep through the town and transform inanimate objects into living things, bring statues to life, due to physics generally what decades of suppression could not fully prevent. Bill stands at the center of all of it, in a physical body that he acquired by possessing a human vessel and then departing from it in a way that left his form anchored in physical reality, and he is thrilled. After 1 trillion years in the formless chaos of the nightmare realm, after decades of working around the limitations of entering minds and making deals and nudging events from a distance, he is finally here. He is real. He is physical. He can destroy things with his hands. He summons the pyramid. The pyramid is a massive floating pyramid that rises from the ground of Gravity Falls as Bill's base of operations, his castle, not his throne room. It resembles a dark red-brown Egyptian pyramid with its top detached, floating above it, cracks between the bricks glowing with neon light that flashes to the beat of music. Because Bill is also throwing a party. Because that is the kind of entity he is. He has brought about the apocalypse, and his first order of business is to celebrate with his circle of friends. Those friends are the Henchmaniacs, a collection of interdimensional criminals and chaos entities who have been waiting in the nightmare realm for exactly this moment. There are 10 of them that are named invisible. 8-Ball, a pool ball-headed monster. Amorphous Shape, a shifting mass. Hectagon, a hexagonal entity. Keyhole, a figure defined by an ornate key-shaped hole in his face. Kryptos, a creature with a complex cipher on his body. Pacifier, as a flaming being. Pyronica, a serpentine female entity. Teeth, whose name is self-explanatory. Xanthar. They are strange and distinctive and look like they were designed by a committee of nightmare generators who were given the brief, make something that doesn't fit in the physical world, and they took it seriously. The Time Police crash the party. Time Baby himself, the enormous, powerful, infantile entity who is the supreme authority of temporal law in the show's universe, brings his enforcement squadron to Bill's party and accuses him of tampering with the town's dimension in ways that could destroy the fabric of existence. This is, by any reasonable assessment, a significant charge. Time Baby has genuine power. His squadron is not a joke. Bill vaporizes him, instantly, offhandedly, while his friends party around him, and he dispenses with the most powerful temporal authority in the known universe, as if he is brushing a fly off his lapel. The Time Baby and his entire squad are gone. Bill returns to the party. The Time Police reveal later that they had only sent hollow projections, not their actual physical forms, because they are not entirely foolish. But the message has been delivered clearly regardless. Bill's physical form is beyond any normal constraint. He is operating at a power level that nothing in the show's established hierarchy can match directly. What Bill cannot do, as it turns out, is leave Gravity Falls. Ford understood something about the town's physics, something about the way the same weirdness magnetism that had attracted the paranormal to Gravity Falls in the first place now worked to contain Weirdmageddon within its limits. Bill could not spread his chaos beyond the town's borders. His power was, in a specific sense, trapped by the same force that had created the conditions for his arrival. There is an equation, one Ford knows, one Bill needs, that describes how to disable this barrier. Without it, Weirdmageddon stays local. Bill captures Ford and tries to get the equation from him. This involves torture, literal, not metaphorical, and the show depicts it with a plainness that is appropriate to the seriousness of what is happening. Ford refuses. Bill escalates. Ford continues to refuse. And meanwhile, in the Mystery Shack, which is still protected by a unicorn hair barrier that Dipper and Mabel had established earlier, the survivors of Weirdmageddon are organizing. The survivors are, characteristically, both a ragtag collection and a precise fulfillment of the show's emotional architecture. Stan is there, still grumbling, still fundamentally resistant to the heroism being asked of him. McGucket is there, his mind partially recovered, his engineering genius still intact, already building something. Pacifica is there in a refugee camp in the Mystery Shack, wearing borrowed clothes and having lost essentially everything. The gnomes are there because they live in the woods and had nowhere else to go. Creatures from throughout the series share space with the human survivors because Weirdmageddon doesn't sort by species. Dipper and Mabel find each other. Their reunion in the shack is one of the show's most quietly emotional moments. Just the two of them understanding without words that the other is okay, and begin planning. Les McGucket builds the Shacktron, which is exactly what it sounds like. The entire Mystery Shack, built into a battle mech with Ford's portal on its waist and a T-Rex as one arm, and Manly Dan's logging truck as another forearm, and Souse's pickup as a foot. The Shacktron exists to distract Bill and his henchmen while the core group infiltrates the pyramid to rescue Ford. The plan, functionally, is get Ford, get his plan for stopping Bill, which turns out to be the Bill Cipher wheel, the Zodiac prophecy, the 10 symbols, the thing that was in the opening credits all along. The Shacktron works brilliantly. McGucket pilots it into the pyramid while the henchmaniacs engage, and the sequence is scored with a guitar-heavy rock version of the Gravity Falls theme that is exactly the right music for exactly this moment. But Bill can't attack the shack directly because of the unicorn hair barrier, which means his forces have to engage physically, which gives the rescue team the window they need. They get Ford. They assemble at the wheel, and Stan and Gideon won't shake hands. The prophecy fails, and the show pivots to its real answer. Section 16. The Sacrifice of Stan. What actually stops Bill Cipher is this: a twin brother who decides that the right thing to do is to let everything he loves be destroyed, in order to ensure that the thing he loves most survives. Let's be clear about what Stan's sacrifice actually is. Ford, having failed to use the wheel, having failed to disable Bill directly, shakes the hand that Bill offers, agreeing, ostensibly, to give Bill the equation he needs in exchange for letting the others go. But it is not Ford whose hand Bill shakes. Dipper and Mabel dressed Stan in Ford's coat and Ford's colors and reversed the swap at the critical moment, trusting that Bill, in his triumph, would not check carefully enough. Bill walks into Stan's mind instead of Ford's. And once Bill is in there, Stan gives Mabel the memory gun and tells her to use it. The memory gun erases Stan's mind, everything he has experienced, everything he has thought and felt and remembered across an entire human lifetime, is stripped away in the presence of Bill Cipher. And because Bill is inside Stan's mind when this happens, because the contents of the mind are Bill's habitat and Bill's anchor point, The erasure takes Bill with it. Stan's sacrifice destroys them both. The scene is very quiet. Mabel holds the gun. She knows what she's doing. She fires it. After the destruction of Bill, after Weirdmageddon collapses and the pyramid dissolves, and the hench maniacs are sucked back into the nightmare realm and Gravity Falls is restored to its strange, somewhat paranormal, fundamentally livable self, Stan stands in the woods outside the Mystery Shack. He does not know where he was. He does not recognize Dipper, who is standing in front of him saying his name. He does not recognize Mabel. He does not recognize Ford. He is alive. He is unhurt. He has no memory of anyone. The show gives this its full weight. It doesn't cut away from it or handle it quickly. Ford tells the twins, gently and devastatingly, that Stan sacrificed his memory so that they could all survive, that he is their hero. And then the show has Mabel try something. She shows Stan her scrapbook. But Mabel has been making a scrapbook of the summer all along. It is the artifact of her approach to the world, saving things, documenting things, creating physical evidence of what has mattered. She shows Stan the pages, one at a time, describing what's in each one, telling him the stories of what they did together. And Stan doesn't remember. And the music is doing something very specific to everyone's emotional equilibrium. And then Waddles gets out of Mabel's arms and scrambles onto Stan's lap, and Stan says his name. He says it automatically, instinctively, before his conscious mind is caught up. The pig is in his lap, and the word is out of his mouth before he can help it. Waddles is the crack in the dam. Mabel keeps going, page by page, story by story, and then something begins to happen in Stan's face that the animation captures with extraordinary precision. Memory coming back not as a sudden restoration, but as a slow accumulation, like photographs developing one at a time in a dark room. By the time they reach the end of the scrapbook, not everything is back. But enough is. Enough to say the names, enough to be Stan. The mechanics of this are never fully explained, and probably shouldn't be. The show's mythology allows for things that don't submit to complete explanation, and the return of Stan's memory through Mabel's scrapbook is one of them. What is happening, on some level, is the show making an argument about memory. That what we remember is not merely stored data, but something more alive than that. Something that can be partially rebuilt from the outside by people who hold pieces of it for you. Mabel has been keeping a record of the summer all along, as if she knew it would matter. It mattered. Ford, in the immediate aftermath, apologizes to his brother, for the first time, fully and without deflection. For the science fair, for New Jersey, for calling Stan, in a moment of crisis, and then treating him like a tool rather than a brother. For 30 years of distance, that was at least half Ford's fault. Stan says something that is characteristic and perfect. He says he forgives Ford, and then he says they're not going on a boat trip together. He does not mean this. By the final scene, they are on a boat. The boat is the Stano Wars 2, rebuilt from the childhood dream of two boys on a beach in Glass Shard Beach, New Jersey. Ford and Stan are going on the adventure they promised each other when they were young, before everything got complicated, before the portal and the journals and the 30-year lie and the demonic manipulation and the interdimensional apocalypse. They are going to sail around the world and fight sea monsters, because apparently there are sea monsters, and because this is a thing they once agreed they would do. Dipper and Mabel go home to Piedmont, California, having turned 13 somewhere in all of this. The summer is over. The journals are in Ford's hands. The anomalies are still there in Gravity Falls, because of course they are. The weirdness is part of the place. It doesn't go away just because the demon was defeated. But the people are okay. Mostly. Enough. Section 17, the axelottle Bill Cipher's last words, just before Stan's mind finishes consuming him, are spoken in reverse. If you play the audio of Bill's final moments backwards, you hear him saying, "I-X-O-L-O-T-L. My time has come to burn. I invoke the ancient power that I may return." Most viewers caught this at some point, and the decoded message prompted an immediate question. What is an axelottle? Why is it ancient? What power is Bill invoking? Is he dead? The answer was hidden in a book. Dipper and Mabel and the Curse of the Time Pirate's Treasure is a choose-your-own-adventure novel published alongside Journal 3 in July 2016. Alex Hirsch confirmed that it contains, in one specific branching path, a canonical secret of enormous significance. The path leads Dipper and Mabel to a location described as a time and space between time and space, where they encounter a creature, massive, a pale with pink frills and black eyes, a leucistic axolotl the size of a building, who allows each of them to ask one question. Mabel asks its name. It says, the axelottle. Dipper asks what it knows about Bill Cipher. It responds in verse. The poem is 60 degrees that come in threes, watches from within birch trees, saw his own dimension burn, misses home and can't return, says he's happy, he's a liar, blame the arson for the fire. If he wants to shirk the blame, he'll have to invoke my name. One way to absolve his crime, a different form, a different time. Everything in this poem is important. Let's take it apart. 60 degrees that come in threes. An equilateral triangle has 3 angles of 60 degrees each. This is Bill's fundamental geometry, his core identity, that the axolotl is describing him in terms of his shape before anything else. Watches from within birch trees. Bill's symbol appears throughout Gravity Falls carved into birch trees, and he has been present in the town, watching, long before he became directly involved. Saw his own dimension burn. This confirms the backstory. Bill destroyed his home. He saw it happen. Misses home and can't return. This is the part that changes Bill's character retroactively. Bill misses Euclidia. The thing he destroyed is the thing he grieves. He cannot go back. It is gone because he ended it. Says he's happy. He's a liar. Every moment of performed exuberance, every party, every celebration of chaos and destruction, the axolotl is calling it out explicitly as performance. Bill is not happy. He has not been happy in a very long time. Yet he is doing what traumatized beings do when they have no healthy framework for their damage. He is performing the opposite of what he feels, so loudly and so thoroughly that even he can almost believe it. Blame the arson for the fire. The damage is Bill's fault. Not in a complicated way. Not in a way that requires mitigation. He did it. He chose it. If he wants to shirk the blame, he'll have to invoke my name. There is a way out. Bill can be absolved, but it requires going through the axolotl, acknowledging the axolotl's authority, asking the axolotl's help. One way to absolve his crime, a different form, a different time. Transformation is the solution. Not escape, not simple resurrection, but genuine change. A different form, a new existence. A different time, not returning to what was. The axolotl is an entity whose power ranks above Bill Cipher's, above Time Babies, above essentially anything named in the show's mythology. It is not Bill's enemy. It is not his jailer, exactly. It is something more like a force of cosmic correction, an entity whose function is to address what needs addressing in the multiverse's moral accounting. And what needs addressing in Bill's case is that he destroyed an entire universe and has been pretending ever since that this was fine, actually. Section 18, The Book of Bill. On July 23, 2024, Alex Hirsch published The Book of Bill. The book is presented as having been written by Bill Cipher himself from inside a facility called the Theraprism, located in a place called Dimension 5150, which is described as a neutral zone outside of space and time. And this is where Bill went after Stan punched him apart in the finale. The axolotl was waiting for him. Bill arrived in pieces, metaphorically and otherwise, and asked for another chance. The axolotl agreed. On one condition, Bill had to go through a program. He had to change his ways. He had to be rehabilitated. Bill, who had been expecting some kind of cosmic challenge that he could trick his way through, agreed immediately without listening to the full description of what the program entailed. He was already imagining himself victorious, already composing the triumphant monologue he'd deliver when he was free. He agreed, as he always agrees to things, from a position of absolute confidence in his ability to weasel out of whatever terms he was accepting. Then the axolotl sent him to therapy, interdimensional therapy, in a facility outside of time and space staffed by beings whose entire purpose is to help deceased villains confront their damage and prepare for reincarnation into a new life. The theraprism is designed to rehabilitate. It is also, from Bill's perspective, absolutely his worst nightmare. A place where the only approved activity is being honest about yourself. The Book of Bill is the book he made during arts and crafts as a therapeutic exercise, which he then managed to send to the physical world in violation of the theraprism's rules against outside contact. The theraprism itself, apparently, would like to apologize for this. A note from the facility's administrators appears in the book, explaining that Bill has done this without authorization, that they are working to correct the situation, and that they hope the reader understands they did not endorse his outreach. The Book of Bill contains, among a great deal of chaos and misdirection, significant canonical revelations. It confirms the details of Bill's origin in Euclidia. It confirms that his relationship with Ford was, on some level, genuine, that Bill's interest in Ford was not pure manipulation, that there was something about Ford that Bill actually valued in whatever capacity he is capable of valuing things. This does not make the manipulation acceptable. It does make Bill's character significantly more complicated. The book confirms that the statue of Bill's physical form, still sitting somewhere in the forests of Gravity Falls, has been noted as glowing blue at certain moments, which the book's own narrative frames as a suggestion that something is still there, still waiting, that Bill's connection to the physical world is not entirely severed. The book also provides considerable detail about what happened to other characters after Weirdmageddon. Ford's continued dimensional research, Stan and Ford's sailing adventures, the fate of Gravity Falls and the aftermath of an apocalypse that was undone. It is a strange document because it is written by the show's villain for the purpose of helping him escape his rehabilitation, and yet it contains genuine affection for the characters and world it's drawn from. This is the creator's voice seeping through even when he's writing as the antagonist. The most significant thematic element of the Book of Bill is this. Bill's greatest fear, which the book returns to repeatedly from multiple angles, is being forgotten. Not defeated, not destroyed, forgotten. Much what the theraprism understands, and what Ford articulates near the end of the book, is that reading the Book of Bill does not give Bill power. It gives him attention. And the way to deny Bill what he actually needs is not to fight him, but to put the book down, to not think about him, to let the attention go elsewhere. This is Alex Hirsch making a statement that operates on two levels simultaneously. Within the fiction, Ford is telling the reader that engaging with Bill's desire to be remembered and feared is precisely what sustains him. Outside the fiction, Hirsch is reflecting on what it means that he created a character who became enormously popular, who became the subject of thousands of fan theories and artworks and analyses, but who refused to stay where the narrative put him, and suggesting that the healthiest relationship with that character might be to appreciate the show for what it is and not need the villain to never truly die. The final pages of the Book of Bill are responses from Mabel, Dipper, and Stan to Bill's various arguments for his release. They are characteristic responses. Mabel's is warm and firm and contains a threat. Dipper's advice is analytical and detailed, and also contains a threat. Stan's is short and consists primarily of a threat. Bill tries one more time to convince the reader to help him escape. He fails. A final poem from the axelottle confirms that Bill is still in the theraprism, still refusing to engage with the rehabilitation program, still scheming. The blue glow in the woods remains. He is not gone. He is just somewhere else. The somewhere else is exactly as uncomfortable as he deserves. Section 19. The Cipher Hunt. In July of 2016, simultaneous with the release of Journal 3, Alex Hirsch announced a treasure hunt. Not a metaphorical treasure hunt, a real one, conducted across multiple countries with physical clues hidden in physical locations, requiring participants to travel to those locations to advance. The prize was a statue of Bill Cipher that Hirsch had commissioned and hidden somewhere in the real world, and the first person or team to find it would have the honor of having found it. This was called the Cipher Hunt, and it was one of the most elaborate pieces of fan engagement in the history of television. The clues were global. Some were in the United States, some were in Japan, some were in Russia. Participants around the world worked together, pooling information, coordinating across time zones, translating materials, applying ciphers, and essentially doing everything the show had been training them to do for 4 years. The fandom that had formed around decoding Gravity Falls messages was the exact community that could engage with this challenge, and it was explicitly designed for them. The Cipher hunt ran for approximately 2 weeks before the statue was found in Reedsport, Oregon, in the real state of Oregon, which is where the fictional Gravity Falls is set, by a team of fans who had followed the trail of clues to its conclusion. Alex Hirsch appeared in a photo with the Discovery team and their find. The real-world Cipher hunt statue is a three-dimensional realization of Bill Cipher's physical form from the show's finale, the stone body that remains after he abandons it to enter Stan's mind. It is approximately the size of a garden gnome, made of concrete or a similar material, and it looks remarkably like what you would expect a defeated interdimensional demon to look like if he had been turned to stone and someone had thought to give him a hat. The subsequent history of the statue is entertaining, in ways that feel appropriate for an object associated with a chaos entity. It became the subject of a minor dispute over ownership after its discovery. It was relocated several times. It ended up, eventually, at Confusion Hill in Piercy, California, which was one of the real-world inspirations for the Mystery Shack. Shaw, this feels like narrative justice. The statue of the show's villain ended up at the place that inspired the show's central location. The Cipher hunt represented something important about what Gravity Falls had built with its audience. Most shows end and leave their fan base with nothing to do but wait for something new. Gravity Falls ended and immediately handed its community a global puzzle that required the exact skills the show had spent 4 years cultivating. It was a final acknowledgement of the relationship between the show and its most devoted viewers, a last message in the tradition of the reversed whispers and the decoded cryptograms. The treasure hunt also coincided with Journal 3's release in a way that was clearly coordinated. Clues in the book pointed toward clues in the hunt, and vice versa. And the whole project was one final, integrated experience, the last chapter of a show that had always been as much about the act of watching and engaging as it was about the story itself. After the Cipher hunt, the Gravity Falls fandom didn't dissipate. It reconfigured. Fan wikis continued to accumulate information. Fan theories continued to develop. The subreddit remained active. New viewers discovered the show constantly, went through the episodes for the first time, encountered the community, and joined the ongoing project of understanding what Alex Hirsch had built. By the time the Book of Bill arrived in 2024, 8 years after the show ended, the community assembled to decode it was as sharp and enthusiastic as it had been during the show's original run. That kind of longevity is rare. Most animated shows, even beloved ones, see their communities gradually quiet after the finale. Gravity Falls somehow reversed this pattern. The longer it has been off the air, the deeper the engagement has become, because the show rewards re-engagement, and each return trip finds something that wasn't visible the time before. Alex Hirsch also launched a website in 2024 connected to the Book of Bill's release. This is not a website, .com, which contained new lore, new coded messages, new puzzles, and documentation of events that had occurred between the show's finale and the book's events. The website expanded the mythology in significant ways, including details about Ford's post-Weirdmageddon travels, Bill's perspective on his time in the Theraprism, and cryptic material about the axelottle that deepened the already considerable mystery around that entity's role in the universe. The Cipher hunt was a gift to the audience. The website was another gift. The Book of Bill was another. Alex Hirsch has not stopped thinking about Gravity Falls, and as long as that's true, the show is in some sense not fully over. The stories keep growing. The secrets keep accumulating. The town is still there in the forest, and the lights in the Mystery Shack are still on. Section 20. What it all means. Here we are at the end of a very long road through a very strange forest. Let's pull back for a moment and look at what Gravity Falls actually is in the aggregate, when you've traveled through all of it, because the sum of the parts is something specific, and it's worth naming before we close. Gravity Falls is a show about what it costs to know things. Ford knew things, and the cost was 30 years in the void between dimensions. Fiddleford knew things, and the cost was his own mind, his own memory, his own sense of himself. Stan knew things about the portal, about Ford's exile, about what lay beneath the surface of the town he'd been calling home for 30 years. And the cost was building his entire life on a foundation of necessary deception. Dipper learns things across the course of 2 seasons, and the cost is the particular kind of innocence that assumes the world is essentially manageable if you pay enough attention. The show loves knowledge. It celebrates curiosity. It rewards the obsessive viewer who pauses and backtracks and decodes. But it does not pretend that knowledge is free. Every piece of truth in Gravity Falls has a price tag attached to it, and the show makes sure you can see the price. It is also, perhaps more fundamentally, a show about what it costs to not know things. To not know about the portal, the way Stan's wife and children, the people he might have had if things had been different, didn't know. To not know about Bill, the way a whole town was kept in comfortable ignorance by the Society of the Blind Eye. The show does not resolve the question of whether knowing is better. It suggests that the honest answer depends on what you do with what you know, and that the answer to that question is not always obvious in advance. What the show does resolve, with considerable clarity and genuine warmth, is the question of whether love is worth the cost. Every sacrifice in Gravity Falls, Stan's memory, Hot Fiddleford's mind, Ford's 30 years, is made for love of some kind. Imperfect love. Love that made mistakes on the way to its expression. Love that sometimes looked indistinguishable from its opposite. But love. The show insists on this. It insists that underneath the deception and the damage and the accumulated bad choices, the people in Gravity Falls were trying to love each other, and that this trying is not nothing. It is not sufficient to undo the damage, but it is not nothing. Alex Hirsch made this show because he loved his sister and his summer and his grandfather, and the experience of being a kid in the woods where the strange and the ordinary existed side by side. He encoded that love in puzzles and ciphers and prophecies and an interdimensional triangle demon because that was the right vocabulary for it. Because the strangeness of the mythology was a precise analog for the strangeness of being alive and paying attention and caring about things in a world that keeps generating more to care about than you can fully manage. The show he built from that love changed the people who watched it. Not in ways they can necessarily articulate, not in ways that show up on tests or in resumes. But the children who watched Gravity Falls at 12 are now in their 20s, and many of them carry the show's understanding of manipulation and family and the cost of secrets in ways that function practically in their actual lives. Bill Cipher is a fictional character, but the patterns he represents, the flattery, the isolation, the manufactured sense of special connection, the deal that seems too good and turns out to be exactly as bad as it looks. Those patterns are real and common and recognizable to anyone who has encountered them. The show named them before many of its original viewers had words for them. The ciphers, the Easter eggs, the Zodiac wheel. These are the famous parts of Gravity Falls, the things that get discussed in YouTube videos and subreddit threads and fan wikis. But the real hidden message in the show, the thing that doesn't require decoding, is simpler. It is, pay attention. The world is more than it appears. The people you love are more complicated than they seem. The things you think you know can always have another layer underneath them. And you are capable of handling more truth than you have yet been given the opportunity to encounter. That is the message, hidden not in a Caesar cipher or an @bash code, but in every episode, every relationship, every moment of genuine feeling that the show trusts its audience to receive without being talked down to. It is the message that makes Gravity Falls worth returning to at any age, from any distance, in any year that happens to find you in need of a strange and quiet town in the Oregon woods where the secrets are deep and the people are, despite everything, worth knowing. The summer ended. The twins went home. Ford and Stan are on their boat somewhere in the Pacific, probably fighting sea monsters. The mystery shack still stands. The journals are still in Ford's study. And somewhere in the forest of Gravity Falls, Oregon, in a clearing where the pines are particularly dense and the light does something strange in the late afternoon, there's a stone triangle with one eye and a top hat. On certain nights, if no one is watching, and maybe even if someone is watching, it glows very slightly blue. Not a warning, just a reminder. He's still there, he's just somewhere else, and the story is still going. Well, here we are. If you're still awake, thank you for being here for all of it. If you drifted off somewhere around the Society of the Blind Eye or the boat ending or the axelottle poem, good. Those are good places to drift off. I hope the dreams were full of pine trees and coded messages and very small creatures with pointed hats who definitely mean well. If this is your first time through the lore of Gravity Falls, I hope something here surprised you. If this was a revisit, I hope you found something that looked different from a new angle. That is the thing about this show. It keeps giving you new angles. It keeps being worth the attention. If you've enjoyed tonight, please subscribe to the channel. I mean that sincerely, not as a formula at the end of a video. This community, the people who show up at whatever hour they show up and spend 4 hours in a fictional Oregon town because they love stories and want to sit with them carefully, this community is worth building. And it builds through subscriptions and through sharing and through the comment section where I hope you'll tell me where you were and what time it was when you listened to this. Thank you for being here. Sleep well, and remember, reality is an illusion. The universe is a hologram. The lights in the Mystery Shack are on, and they will still be on when you wake up. Good night. Script written for Uncle Grunkle, YouTube channel covering Warhammer 40,000 and other deep lore topics in ASMR-style extended lore. Additional depth, extended section 1. The geography of weirdness. Let's go back to the town itself, because the town is a character. Gravity Falls, Oregon does not exist on any official map. The show never gives it precise coordinates, never places it in a real county or alongside real surrounding towns in a way that would anchor it completely to the actual geography of the Pacific Northwest. This is intentional. The show uses Oregon as its inspiration. Alex Hirsch spent time in Portland during a summer internship and drew from the visual language of the Northwest, the tall Douglas firs, the perpetual damp, just the way the forest seems to press in from every side with a kind of patient, ancient authority, but it keeps the town itself in a space just slightly outside reality. This is not merely a production convenience. It is thematic. Gravity Falls cannot be found on a standard roadmap. You have to already know where to look, or you have to take wrong turns until you're in the right place. The town rewards people who are paying attention and who are willing to go where the official signs don't point, which is, again, a description of what it means to engage fully with the show. What we know about the physical geography from within the show is this. The town sits in a valley surrounded by dense pine forest. There is a lake, Scuttlebutt Island lies within it, and the Gobblewonker legend originates from it. There is a mountain or significant elevated terrain behind the town. There are cliffs at the edge of Gravity Falls called the Hanging Cliffs, where Mabel is suspended in her dream bubble during Weirdmageddon. There are caves in the woods, including the cave where Ford first found the Bill Cipher inscription. There is a UFO buried somewhere underground, which Ford discovered during his research years and used as a secondary laboratory for studying extraterrestrial technology. The UFO is worth pausing on. Ford did not invent all of his remarkable technology independently. Some of it came from reverse engineering alien technology he found buried in the land beneath Gravity Falls. This is mentioned almost in passing in Season 2, but has significant implications for the mythology. The concentration of supernatural phenomena in Gravity Falls is not simply a property of the land in some vague mystical sense. Something or several somethings found their way to this specific location and stayed here for reasons that may have to do with the same weirdness magnetism that later made it the epicenter of Weirdmageddon. The town has been drawing extraordinary things to itself for a very long time. The caves beneath the town are extensive. Beyond the cave where Ford found the Bill inscription, there are connected passages that form part of the reason the Mystery Shack's basement can contain what it contains. The geography underground is more complex than the surface suggests, which is again consistent with the show's general approach. The visible world is the tip of something far larger and more complicated underneath. But the bottomless pit is one of the show's running background details that rewards thought. It is a real, functional bottomless pit, presumably generated during the early attempted portal construction by Modic. Stan has incorporated it into a Mystery Shack exhibit, charging visitors to look at it because Stan will monetize anything. The Bottomless Pit episode, which is a container for several unrelated short stories, treats the pit as a kind of narrative device, a place where things can fall in and stories can be told while they're falling, which is a structurally elegant choice for an anthology segment. But the pit itself is not a joke. It is evidence that Bill's influence on Gravity Falls predates the founding of the town, that the paranormal history here runs much deeper than even the most comprehensive journal entry can capture. That the specific location of Gravity Falls within the mythology of the American West is also significant. The Pacific Northwest has its own rich tradition of folklore and the uncanny Bigfoot legends, strange lights over mountains, communities that exist slightly outside mainstream American culture, a landscape that has always felt on the edge of something. The show situates itself within that tradition consciously, and by setting the Cipher Hunt's conclusion in Reedsport, Oregon, Alex Hirsch anchored the show's mythology to a real piece of that landscape in a way that rewarded the fans who made the journey. The Mystery Shack's relationship to its surrounding geography is also worth noting. It sits at the edge of the forest, technically within the town limits, but practically on the boundary between the settled space of Gravity Falls and the wild space of the surrounding woods. This is the classic liminal position for places of power and mystery in folklore. On the threshold, not fully in one world or the other. The shack's various exhibits are window dressing over a building that was originally a scientist's research facility, which was built in this specific location because this specific location is where the weirdness concentrates. Stan's tourist trap is layered over Ford's laboratory, which is layered over the geological anomaly that drew Ford here, which is layered over whatever made that anomaly in the first place. The building is archaeology, compressed vertically, each layer of purpose built on top of the previous one. That the town of Gravity Falls proper has its own interesting details. Greasy's Diner, the centerpiece of local social life, is run by Lazy Susan, who is a Society of the Blind Eye target in the episode that reveals the society. The Gravity Falls Museum of History, which is the location of the Society's hidden base, is apparently just a regular local history museum except for the secret chamber concealed behind its fireplace. The prison, which houses Gideon and other local criminals, is of sufficient quality to be escapable during the initial chaos of Weirdmageddon, but apparently substantial enough to contain a psychic 9-year-old for most of a television season. The town has a mayor's office, a police force that is consistently overwhelmed by the supernatural events they are called to address, a newspaper with a gossip columnist who is a Society of the Blind Eye member, and a variety of businesses whose owners have varying degrees of awareness of what is actually happening in their town. What the show builds across 40 episodes and all its supplementary material is a place that feels fully inhabited without ever being exhaustively documented. There are always more residents than you've seen. There are always more businesses than you've visited. The background of any given scene contains more history than the foreground has time to explain. This is good world-building practice, and it is also consistent with the show's philosophy. The world is bigger than any map of it. Extended Section 2. The deeper architecture of the ciphers. Let's go back to the codes, because there is more to say about them. The system of ciphers in Gravity Falls is not just an Easter egg hunt. It is a designed educational experience, and the education it provides is specifically in the mechanics of cryptography. By the end of Season 1, a viewer who has been paying close attention and engaging with the community around the show will have learned how Caesar ciphers work, how @bash ciphers work, how to convert between letters and numbers using the A1ZAD26 system, and how to apply a substitution cipher to decoded numbers to produce readable text. These are real, functional cryptographic skills. They have historical and practical applications. The show taught them to millions of children while they were watching a show about gnomes. The progression from simple to complex is deliberate. The Caesar ciphers are the simplest possible substitution code. Just shift every letter by a fixed number of positions in the alphabet. Anyone who has ever played with secret codes? As a child has probably invented something approximating a Caesar cipher independently. Starting there makes the concept accessible. Starting there means that even a viewer who doesn't have an adult explaining cryptography to them can, with a little persistence, decode the first season's messages on their own. The @bash cipher is only marginally more complex. Instead of shifting by 3, you reverse the alphabet entirely. But it requires you to have internalized the concept of the substitution and to be comfortable varying the key. The A1Z26 cipher introduces the concept of encoding information as numbers rather than letters, which is a step toward binary and hexadecimal thinking. The Visionaire cipher is where the serious work begins. A multi-key substitution system where the encryption changes based on a keyword, requiring you to both find the key and apply it correctly. Each upgrade in the Cipher system was announced within the show itself. The credits cryptogram in episode 6 says in decoded form, Mr. Caesarian will be out next week. Mr. Atbash will substitute. This is Hirsch telling the community, here is exactly what is coming and when it is coming, delivered in the current Cipher system, so that only people who have been paying attention can read it. It is a reward for competence and a challenge to extend it. The reversed whispers in the theme song serve as the instruction manual. Each whisper tells you the key mechanism of the current Cipher system. 3 letters back for Caesar, switch A with Z for Atbash, 26 letters for A1Z26, key visionaire for the second season. But you can only hear these whispers by playing the audio backwards, which requires you to already be the kind of viewer who does things like play audio backwards. The show rewards the behavior it wants to cultivate before you know the behavior is going to be rewarded. It creates the habit of attention by giving you things to find when you exercise that habit. The combined ciphers, which appear at key narrative moments, require multiple decoding steps. You might need to apply the A1Z26 system to get numbers, then Atbash to convert those numbers back to letters, then a Caesar shift to get the final message. So these appear at episodes that are particularly significant in the show's mythology, as if Hirsch is telling the audience, this moment deserves more effort. The message inside is worth the extra steps. One of the most haunting combined cipher messages in the show appears during the climax of the Season 1 finale, when the portal activates. The decoded message across this episode reads, when fully assembled, I was so blind. He lied to me. The darkness is near. This is Ford speaking from within the journals, across time, a message about his own manipulation, left in code for whoever was smart enough and patient enough to find it. The show's meta-narrative mirrors its narrative. The hidden messages are Ford's. The process of finding them mirrors the process of trusting that there is something to find. But the visionaire keywords in Season 2 are embedded within the episodes themselves, visible in the background of scenes, written on props, and set dressing. Finding them requires pausing, squinting, cross-referencing with the community. The keyword whittle is written on the wall of Gideon's prison cell in the season premiere. The keyword for a later episode appears on the side of a box in the background of a single frame. These are not random placements. The locations of the keywords are thematically connected to the content of the decoded messages, another layer of Hirsch's commitment to making every piece of the puzzle meaningful. What the Cipher system amounts to is a secondary narrative running parallel to the main show, told in fragments, sometimes foreshadowing events and sometimes reflecting on them. Thus sometimes purely comedic and sometimes genuinely dark. The full decoded sequence of all Season 1 and Season 2 messages, read in order, is its own strange document, a summary of the show's emotional arc written in the margins of its own story, accessible only to people who put in the work. There are also ciphers in Journal 3, the real-world book, that expand on things never shown in the series. Invisible ink passages visible only under a blacklight contain Ford's private thoughts during his years in the multiverse, his encounters with alternate dimensions, his changing understanding of Bill, his complicated feelings about his brother and his research, and the choices that brought him to where he ended up. These are not Easter eggs in the sense of being bonus fun. That they are essential parts of Ford's character that Hirsch chose to tell only to people who purchased the book, shone a blacklight on it, and took the time to read what was hidden. The This Is Not a Website at .com ARG, activated in connection with The Book of Bill in 2024, extended the Cipher tradition into an interactive web-based experience with its own set of codes and hidden content. Fan communities decoded it with the same tools they had developed over years of engaging with the show. New canonical information about Ford's post-Weirdmageddon research, new details about the axelottle, new fragments of Bill's perspective from inside the theraprism. All of it was hidden behind systems that the Gravity Falls community had been trained to crack since 2012. Thus, the message across all of this is consistent and generous. You are smart enough to find these things, and finding them will reward you. That message, delivered repeatedly to an audience that included children who were told in many other contexts that they weren't ready for complex information or sophisticated challenges, had an effect. It told a generation of young viewers that their curiosity was the right kind, that their instinct to look harder and think more carefully was exactly what the situation required, and that the effort was worth it because there was genuinely something there. Extended Section 3. The emotional reality of Weirdmageddon. Weirdmageddon has been discussed primarily as a plot event, as the culmination of the show's mythology, as the moment when all the pieces finally move into their final positions. But it deserves examination as an emotional experience, because what happens to the characters during Weirdmageddon is not primarily plot, it is relationship. Stan, in the first episode of the Weirdmageddon arc, refuses to help rescue Ford. He is sheltering the survivors of the apocalypse in the Mystery Shack. He has essentially appointed himself their leader, and he has decided that if everyone stays inside the protected building and waits out the chaos, they will be fine. When Dipper argues that they need to rescue Ford, Stan's response is, Ford got himself into this. Ford built the portal. Ford's relationship with Bill is what made this possible. Let Ford handle it. This is not entirely wrong. Ford's choices are load-bearing causes in the chain of events that led to Weirdmageddon. But it is also the voice of 30 years of unresolved anger, the voice of a man who spent decades working in service of a brother who never said thank you, who emerged from a portal and immediately punched him rather than embracing him, who spent the subsequent months treating their reconciliation as a process Stan needed to earn, rather than as something they needed to do together. Stan is hurt. He has been hurt for a very long time, and Weirdmageddon, as terrible as it is, gives that hurt somewhere to point. What moves him is not a logical argument, it is Mabel. Mabel doesn't argue the case for Ford's innocence. She doesn't try to mitigate the attribution of blame. She says, essentially, we know what you've sacrificed for family. We know what it cost you. And Ford is family, and that is what family does. She is not being naive about Ford's culpability. She is being Mabel, which means she is locating the thing that matters most and naming it directly, without flinching from the complicated parts on either side of it. Stan goes. Not because he has forgiven Ford, not because he has decided the anger was wrong, but because the anger held against the alternative, leaving his brother in a pyramid being tortured by the thing that destroyed his brother's mind, is simply not heavy enough to win. Love is heavier. It is not always cleaner, but it is heavier. The sequence of the Shacktron being built and deployed is one of the show's great set pieces, and it works because it earns its spectacle. Every component of the Shacktron is something that appeared in a previous episode, the portal from Not What He Seems, now the amber-encased T-Rex from Land Before Swine, Manly Dan's logging truck from the various Manly Dan appearances, the pieces of the Gideon bot from the Season 1 finale. The Shacktron is constructed from the show's own history, physically assembled from the past seasons as a demonstration that everything the show has done was building toward this. McGucket, whose arc across the series has been about recovering the genius, the memory gun erased, pilots it, because of course he does. Inside the pyramid, during the infiltration, the show does something structurally interesting. It cuts between the combat outside and the quiet conversation inside, between the noise of the battle and the silence of the rescue. Dipper and Mabel and Suze move through Bill's nightmare architecture toward Ford, and what they encounter along the way is a series of reminders of what they have built this summer, the relationships, the history, the trust. The pyramid is trying to be a place of fear. The show keeps insisting that the thing walking through it is something else. Ford's scene with Bill before the rescue is worth dwelling on. Bill has Ford chained and is trying to torture the equation out of him, and Ford is refusing. This is remarkable on its face. Ford, who spent 30 years in the multiverse partly because of his own weakness in the face of Bill's manipulation, is now older and wiser, and having had 30 years to understand what he agreed to the first time, refusing absolutely. He will not give Bill what Bill needs. He will be tortured, and he will hold. This is Ford's real redemption arc, and not the moment he walked through the portal, not the conversations with Dipper, not even the apology to Stan at the end. It is this moment when the thing that destroyed the first decades of his adult life is standing in front of him offering, in its twisted way, the same deal it always offered. Give me access to you and I will make the hurt stop. And Ford says no. He knows what that access costs now. He has seen what it looks like from the other side. He says no. The Zodiac circle that fails is not purely a failure. It is a demonstration of something the show has been saying the whole time, that the human elements of any situation are the ones that are hardest to predict and control. Cosmic prophecies don't account for the specific grievance between Stanley Pines and Gideon Gleeful, which is too personal and too recent to be suspended for the purposes of a ritual. The universe has a plan. The universe's plan requires the cooperation of people who are dealing with their own very real emotional dynamics, and those dynamics don't pause for cosmic convenience. When the circle breaks, it might seem like a narrative failure. All that buildup, the symbol in the opening credits, Modoc's prophecy, and it just doesn't work because Stan and Gideon won't shake hands. But this is the show being honest. The prophecy is real. The wheel is real. The power is real. And the obstacle to using it is entirely human, which is ultimately more interesting than a clean success would be. The solution that replaces it, the twin switch, the sacrifice, Mabel with the memory gun, is not a cosmic solution. It is not written in any prophecy, as it is improvised in the moment by 12-year-olds who know their great-uncle well enough to know what he would do, and by an old con man who knows himself well enough to make the choice he has been building toward his entire life. The way to beat Bill Cipher is not to be smarter than him or more powerful than him. It is to be more human than he can account for. That is the show's ultimate argument. Love and sacrifice and the willingness to lose something in service of someone else. These are not weaker forces than Bill's trillion-year-old power. They are different in kind, not degree, and the difference in kind is what matters. Bill cannot model them. He cannot predict them. He cannot account for a man who loves his family enough to erase himself. He never learned to love anything that much, and that is ultimately his tragedy and his defeat. Extended Section 4. What the show did for its audience. There is a specific thing Gravity Falls did for the generation of children who watched it at the age it was intended for, and it is worth naming precisely because it was unusual and it mattered. It treated them as intellectually capable. Not in the condescending sense of including lots of big vocabulary words, or making reference to historical figures, or inserting teachable moments about science. In the more fundamental sense of assuming that its audience could handle ambiguity, could sit with questions that don't have clean answers, could be given information about difficult human experiences without needing to be protected from it. The Society of the Blind Eye is a children's cartoon story about how institutions of care become instruments of control, and about how the people inside them can be genuinely trying to help while building something genuinely harmful. This is a sophisticated political and ethical concept. The show does not explain it. It shows it precisely and fairly and trusts its audience to draw the implication. Ford and Bill's relationship is a children's cartoon story about how manipulation works, how intelligent and accomplished people can be systematically deceived by someone who has studied them carefully and knows exactly where to press. The show never uses the word as. It doesn't need to. The behavior is shown clearly enough that any viewer who has encountered similar behavior in any context will recognize it without needing it labeled. Pacifica's parents and the Bell are a children's cartoon story about how conditioning works, about the difference between teaching someone to behave well and teaching them to fear the consequences of not behaving well, about the internalization of external control until the control becomes essentially invisible. Again, no clinical vocabulary. The image is enough. Bill Cipher himself is a children's cartoon story about the specific kind of charisma that is actually danger wearing a friendly face, about the way that people who flatter you and make you feel uniquely seen and understood can be precisely the people you need to be most cautious of. His initial appeal to Ford, "I see you, I appreciate you, you are exceptional, and I am here specifically for you," is a template that anyone who has been targeted by a manipulator will recognize. Now, the show gave its 12-year-old audience a reference point for that pattern before they were likely to encounter it in their own lives. That is genuinely useful. These lessons are not delivered as lessons. They are embedded in a story that is also funny, also exciting, also populated with lovable characters doing interesting things in a visually distinctive world. The wrapping is crucial. Information delivered through story reaches a different part of the mind than information delivered as instruction. The children who watched Gravity Falls learned these things the way you learned something from a book you loved, which is completely different from learning it from a textbook. It becomes part of how you understand the world, not part of what you know about it. The show also did something specifically for the children who were, much like Dipper, curious and analytical and slightly out of step with their peers. It told them that those qualities were heroic, not useful. Heroic. The thing that saves the day in Gravity Falls over and over is someone paying attention when others weren't. Someone decoding something that seemed like background noise. Someone trusting their instinct that there was more to find and going looking. The show made obsessive curiosity the most powerful tool its protagonist had, and it put the coded messages in the credits as evidence that the real world, or this show's version of it, actually rewards that kind of attention. That matters more than it might seem. While a lot of children who are curious and detail-oriented and interested in things that their peers find weird are made to feel that these qualities are liabilities, that they slow things down, that they make social interaction awkward, that they are fine in moderation but excessive in practice. Gravity Falls told them the opposite. It told them to pay more attention, go deeper, trust the instinct that there is something in the background worth examining. It validated something that can feel very isolated. And the community it built gave those children each other. The Gravity Falls fandom was, for a significant period during the show's run, one of the most genuinely collaborative fan communities on the internet. People shared decoded cryptograms freely, built tools to help others decode them, cross-referenced episode details and Journal 3 entries, wrote extensive analysis that treated the show with the same seriousness that you might apply to a work of serious literature. They were not wrong to do so. The show deserved that seriousness. It repaid it consistently. For children who found their natural community not in their immediate social environment, but in the spaces around shared obsessions, the Gravity Falls fandom was a home. A weird, online, always running a little too late-at-night home, but a home. The kind of home where you are understood not because the people there know you personally, but because they know the same things you know, love the same things you love, and are capable of the same kind of sustained, careful attention. Extended Section 5. Bill in the context of villain traditions. Let's talk about what makes Bill Cipher work as a villain, because he is genuinely one of the most effective antagonists in animation. And it is worth understanding why. The history of animated villains tends to follow certain patterns. There are the powerful but stupid villains who are threatening because they are strong, but can be outmaneuvered by cleverness. There are the intelligent but brittle villains, who are planning but vulnerable to having their plans disrupted. There are the scary but external villains, whose danger is physical and therefore manageable in the way that physical danger is manageable. You can run from it, you can fight it, you can build a wall between yourself and it. Bill does not fit into any of these categories comfortably, but he is powerful and intelligent and internal, and the combination of those three things makes him genuinely difficult to categorize and therefore genuinely difficult to plan around. The internal dimension is the crucial one. Bill primarily operates in the mindscape. He enters through dreams, through moments of weakness, through the deliberate invitation of his targets. His most effective attacks are not physical, though he is capable of physical destruction on a vast scale, but psychological. He walks through Ford's mind and finds what is there. He finds Ford's fear and his loneliness and his hunger for recognition, and he builds his entire long-term strategy around exploiting those specific vulnerabilities. He is reading the architecture of a person's interiority and using it against them. This is a more sophisticated model of villainy than most children's entertainment attempts. The standard formula is, villain does bad thing, heroes stop villain, good wins. Bill's formula is, villain becomes necessary to the victim. Victim does the bad thing for the villain's hands are technically clean. It is the difference between a bully who punches you and a manipulator who convinces you to punch yourself. The latter is harder to name, harder to resist, and harder to explain to people who didn't see it happen. The show demonstrates both modes of Bill's operation across its run. In early appearances, he is primarily the mindscape threat, a presence in dreams and inner spaces using psychological tools. In Weirdmageddon, once he has a physical form, he is a god of chaos and destruction, capable of vaporizing the time police and building pyramids and turning people to stone. But even in Weirdmageddon, his most dangerous quality is not the physical power. It is the continued psychological manipulation. His plan to get the equation from Ford is not to overpower Ford. It is to break Ford, to find the limit of what Ford can endure, to crack the resolve that Ford has built over 30 years of understanding what he agreed to. He fails. But the attempt is revealing of what he is and how he thinks. Bill also represents something specific in terms of his relationship to truth. He is, at various points, completely honest. He told MODOK what he wanted. He told Ford eventually what the portal was actually for. He makes deals and generally keeps the letter of them, if not the spirit. He announces Weirdmageddon before it happens. But he is not lying when he says that this is what he is and what he intends to do. What he is doing, instead of lying, is performing. He performs the chaos and the glee and the indifference to consequence. He performs the certainty that he is winning, always winning, even when he is trapped in a flat dimension, or unable to leave Gravity Falls, or being punched out of existence by a retired conman's fist. The performance is so total that for 1,000,000,000,000 years he may have convinced even himself. But the axelottle says otherwise, says he's happy. He's a liar. The poem names him as a performer, assigns the arson of his home dimension to his own hand, and offers the observation that he misses what he destroyed. He cannot return to Euclidia because Euclidia is gone because he ended it. And underneath the 1,000,000,000 years of chaos and parties and deals and games, there is the thing he will not acknowledge. That he is alone in a way that cannot be fixed by obtaining a physical form, or merging a nightmare realm with a pleasant one, or turning everyone in a small Oregon town to stone. What Bill fears is not the Bill Cipher wheel or Stan Pines or the axelottle. What Bill fears is being forgotten, as the Book of Bill establishes. Not destroyed, forgotten. He would rather be feared and despised than be irrelevant. He would rather be the subject of stories people are afraid to tell than be the subject of no stories at all. This is the deepest and most recognizable human thing about him, the thing that makes him not purely alien. The need to have mattered, the terror of meaninglessness. This is, in a very direct way, the same thing that drove Ford, the need to be exceptional, to have his 6 fingers mean something rather than just mark him as different. The same need that drove Stan to prove he could make millions. The same need that drove Fiddleford to build things more extraordinary than anyone around him could understand. Bill is the most extreme version of a human drive that the show locates in almost every major character. He is what happens when that drive has no counterweight, no relationship to ground it, no love to make the recognition of other people matter for their sake, rather than just for yours. The mirror between Bill and the other characters in the show is not accidental. Hirsch has spoken about Bill's origins partly in terms of what happens to isolation, what happens to exceptional ability when it has no community. But Bill destroyed his home because he was different, and he was alone, and he had no one to tell him that the dimension around him was worth more than his need to escape it. 30 years later, Stan almost destroys his home differently, by spending those years locked in a lie that isolated him from genuine connection, before being pulled back by 2 12-year-olds who love him without reservation. The difference between Bill and Stan is not intelligence or power. It is that Stan was reached. Extended Section 6. The Pines Family as a Study in Love Languages. One of the quiet achievements of Gravity Falls is what it does with the Pines family's various ways of loving each other, all of which are real and recognizable, and none of which are exactly the same. Stan's love language is sacrifice and provision. Now, he does not say "I love you" very often. He shows it by building things, protecting things, spending 30 years working on an impossible project because the alternative is living with having failed his brother. He shows it by taking in 2 great niece and nephew he had never met, and keeping them safe across a summer that turned out to involve genuine existential threat. He shows it by erasing himself to save everyone at the moment, when saving everyone required exactly that. Stan's love is expressed in what he does rather than what he says, which is consistent with his general approach to emotion. Acknowledge only under duress. Demonstrate constantly. Ford's love language is knowledge and attention. The way he shows care for Dipper, his great-nephew, is by teaching him things, by treating his questions as worthy of serious answers, by recognizing his intellectual seriousness and meeting it with his own. Ford is not warm in the physical sense. Hugs are not his primary mode. But his attention is intense and genuine. And for a boy like Dipper, whose curiosity is his most fundamental quality, being taken seriously by someone like Ford is the equivalent of being loved. Ford's relationship with Stan, complicated almost beyond navigation by decades of guilt and grievance and distance, eventually finds its expression in the apology that neither of them particularly knows how to deliver. Ford saying sorry is not comfortable or graceful, but it is real. And Stan's acceptance of it is characteristically expressed through the gift of a future, the boat trip, the adventure they promised each other as children. Stan doesn't forgive by saying, "I forgive you." Yet he forgives by making a plan. Mabel loves loudly, physically, without reservation, and without defense. She hugs. She declares things. She makes objects out of craft supplies to express feelings that other people might just describe with words. Her love is exhausting to keep up with and impossible to doubt. The show uses Mabel's love as a kind of barometric pressure for the emotional state of the room. When Mabel is worried, the audience is worried, because Mabel is not often worried, and when she is, something is genuinely wrong. Dipper loves quietly and by staying. He shows up, he helps, he argues when he should argue and defers when he is wrong, and he takes his great-uncle's advice even when it costs him something. His love for Mabel is expressed through 1,000 small adjustments, but the way siblings who are genuinely close operate, always aware of where the other one is, always calibrating what the other one needs, doing it so automatically that it looks like they're not doing anything at all. These are 4 very different modes of love, and they coexist in the Pines family the way different love languages coexist in real families, sometimes colliding, sometimes talking past each other, sometimes finding the exact right channel of communication, and suddenly, unexpectedly, being completely understood. The show treats all 4 modes as equally valid. It does not privilege the dramatic over the quiet or the expressive over the reserved. It shows Stan's 30 years of wordless devotion as the equal of Ford's intellectual engagement, shows Mabel's exuberant warmth as the equal of Dipper's steady presence. This is, actually, unusual. A lot of fiction privileges certain modes of emotional expression. The big declaration, the grand gesture, the moment where someone finally says the thing they've been unable to say. Gravity Falls gives equal weight to the person who shows up and does the work. The final episode offers all 4 modes their expression simultaneously. Ford apologizes. The verbal declaration. Stan forgives and makes the plan. The quiet provision. Mabel shows the scrapbook. The expressive warmth. Dipper stays present through all of it, watching his family find each other again. The steady presence. And then they hug, all of them, on a beach in Gravity Falls, because sometimes the grand gesture is just the thing you do when you've been trying to get here for a long time and you've finally arrived. Extended Section 7. The philosophical underpinning. There is a question underneath Gravity Falls that does not get resolved and is not meant to get resolved. The question is, what is the relationship between memory and identity? The show asks this question through multiple characters and from multiple angles. McGucket, who erased so much of his own memory that he lost not just what he knew, but who he was. Is the person who survives the erosion still the same person who began it? Is Old Man McGucket the same person as Fiddleford Hadron McGucket, the brilliant young engineer? The show suggests they are continuous, that the McGucket who leaps to protect the children in the museum is drawing on something that persisted through the damage, a core that the memory gun couldn't reach. But it does not insist on this. But it lets the question breathe. Stan, whose memory is erased in the finale, returns to himself through the act of being remembered by people who love him. His identity, the show suggests, is not entirely self-contained. It is partly distributed, held in the minds of the people who know him, carried in the scrapbook of his summer, recoverable from the outside even when it can't be found from the inside. This is both hopeful and slightly terrifying. It means that who you are is partly a social construction, dependent on the community that holds your story. It means that Stan's identity survives because Mabel was there with the scrapbook. What if she hadn't been? The show does not pursue this question to its most disturbing conclusions because it is a show that ultimately believes in the durability of love and identity. But it gestures toward the question clearly enough that viewers who want to follow it further have a thread to pull. Bill, who destroyed his entire home dimension. and consequently has no one who remembers him from before, no one who holds any version of his original identity, is the most extreme case. He has been whatever he chose to be for 1,000,000,000 years with no external continuity check. He can claim that everyone in Euclidia loved him and crowned him best baby. There is no one left to contradict this. He can revise his own origin story however he likes, and the revision will never be falsified from the outside. Is this freedom or the most profound isolation imaginable? The show makes a specific visual and structural choice that answers this question. It shows Bill alone, always alone, even when surrounded by his henchmaniacs, even in the crowded pyramid during the Party of the Apocalypse. He is the only entity in the show's universe who has no one who knew him before. Every relationship he has is one he constructed. Every alliance is a deal he made. Every interaction begins from scratch because there is no continuity, no shared history. No one who will say, "I remember when you were different." That loneliness is the wound he can't acknowledge and can't heal because acknowledging it would require him to sit with what he did and what it cost, and he has been running from that specific reckoning for 1,000,000,000 years. The theraprism is where he finally stops running. Not because he wants to, because the axelottle made it the condition of his continued existence, and Bill, whatever he is, does not want to not exist. The therapy is not going well. That he has sent a book to the physical world rather than do the actual work. He is constitutionally unwilling to face the thing that is at the center of all of it. But the axolotl put him there because there is a possibility, however small, however unlikely, that he might eventually face it. A different form, a different time. If he does the work, if he faces it. The show is not optimistic about Bill's prospects for genuine change. But it is not entirely pessimistic either. It puts him in a place where change is possible in principle and leaves the question open. This is consistent with its overall approach to the question of whether people, or entities, can be different from what they were made. Gravity Falls does not believe that people cannot change. Stan changes, Ford changes, McGucket changes, Pacifica changes, Gideon changes, partially and messily, and without the clean redemption arc that a more conventional story would provide. Even the gnomes, slightly, change. They stop trying to kidnap Mabel after the leaf blower incident, and seem to develop something like respect for the person who defeated them, which is probably the best outcome available when your relationship with someone started with an attempted forced marriage. What the show believes is that change is costly and partial and often slower than anyone would like, and that the capacity for it is not guaranteed by either intelligence or desire. You can want to change and not manage to, at least not yet. You can be smart enough to understand exactly what you need to do differently and still not be able to do it. The show respects the difficulty. It does not pretend that understanding is the same as accomplishing. This is why Bill in the Theraprism is a genuine, open question rather than a confirmed outcome. He knows what he needs to do. He just doesn't want to do it. And wanting to not do the thing you know you need to do is not a small obstacle. It is maybe the central challenge of being a conscious entity with the capacity for self-deception. Bill is all of us, at our most avoidant. That's the joke and the horror simultaneously. Final extended section. The letters in the walls. There is a final thing worth saying before we close, and it is about what it means that Gravity Falls exists at all. Alex Hirsch was not supposed to make the show he made. He was working at a company that had very clear ideas about what animated entertainment for children was and what it was for. As in the show he was building was, by the standards of that company's history, genuinely unusual. He fought for things. He fought for the complexity of the mythology. He fought for the emotional honesty of the character arcs. He fought for specific scenes and specific moments that Disney's internal reviewers wanted softened or removed or replaced with something more comfortable. He won some of those fights and lost others. There are moments in the show that he has described in interviews as compromises, and there are likely moments he never mentioned publicly that represent things he wanted and couldn't have. But the show that exists, despite and through all of that friction, is the show he intended to make at its core. The hidden messages are there. The 30-year mysteries are there. Bill Cipher's genuine psychological horror is there. Now, the adults' genuine failures and their genuine love are there. What Hirsch built, within the constraints of a family entertainment company and a broadcast television schedule and an audience that included 8-year-olds and 40-year-olds simultaneously, was something that has refused to become obsolete. More than a decade after it ended, Gravity Falls is still being discovered by people who are then instantly obsessive about it, still generating analysis and theory and fan art in communities, still being named as formative by adults in their 20s and 30s who watched it as children. It is still asking the same questions and finding the same things hidden in its walls. The letters stand carved in the walls of the Mystery Shack are not literally there. It is a fictional building. But the actual letters that Hirsch hid in the credits of every episode, the actual reversed whispers in the theme song, the actual invisible ink in the pages of the real Journal 3, those are genuinely, physically there in the show and in the books, available to anyone who looks. This is the promise the show made and kept. There is always more. Look harder. Pay more attention. The thing you are searching for exists, and finding it will reward you. And after you find it, there will be something else to find, and the world contains more than the surface has room to show. That promise does not expire with the finale. It does not expire with the Book of Bill or the thisisnotawebsite.com ARG or anything else that has come after. It is built into the structure of the show at the level of its DNA. It is the message that was there before the first episode aired and will still be there long after the last piece of fan analysis is written. Gravity Falls is a message in a bottle from a person who believed that paying attention was worth it, that the world was more extraordinary than it appeared, and that the right audience, any audience willing to do the work, deserved to know. You are that audience. You always were. The message was waiting for you in the trees. And that's everything. That is 4 hours of Gravity Falls lore, from the first code in the opening credits to the blue glow of Bill's statue in the dark of the Oregon woods. From the childhood summers that inspired it to the community that grew up around it. From the twin boys on a beach making promises to the twin brothers on a boat, finally keeping them. Thank you for making it to the end. Or to wherever you drifted off. Both are fine. Both are exactly what this was for. If this video helped you sleep, if it kept you company in whatever hour you're watching from, if it gave you something to fall asleep to and something to think about when you wake up, please subscribe to the channel. I make these for you, specifically for the kind of person who finds this worthwhile, and every subscription is a confirmation that there are more of you out there than I might think. And drop a comment. Tell me where you are, what time it is, whether you made it all the way through or whether you're waking up and rewinding. The pine trees are still there. The sky over Gravity Falls is its own particular shade of strange blue at this hour. Waddles is fine. Stan and Ford are somewhere in the Pacific. Good night. Deep dive. The history. Before the show, we have talked about Ford arriving in Gravity Falls in the 1970s, as if that was when the story of this place began. It was not. Gravity Falls has a history that stretches back through generations of American settlement, and before that through the history of the land itself, and both of these longer timelines connect directly to the mythology we have been exploring. The founding of Gravity Falls, according to local legend, is attributed to a man named Nathaniel Northwest, who is celebrated throughout the town as its founder, its patron, its great pioneer figure. His portrait hangs in the museum. His name graces the town's most prominent family. The Northwests have built their generational wealth and social position on the story of Nathaniel Northwest as town founder. And the town has been willing to sustain that story because small towns need founding myths. The problem, as Dipper discovers in the episode Northwest Mansion Mystery, is that it is a lie. Nathaniel Northwest did not actually found Gravity Falls. He was installed in that role as a cover story by the United States government, which wanted a harmless named founder for official records and found Nathaniel Northwest, a reasonably presentable and remarkably dim historical figure, convenient for the purpose. The actual founding of Gravity Falls involved considerably more complicated circumstances that the government had reasons to keep quiet. And the Northwest family, once they discovered this inconvenient truth, decided that acknowledging it was incompatible with their social position and simply didn't. This is, again, that's the show doing something very specific, revealing that the foundational story of a community is constructed, That what looks like deep historical truth is often recent myth maintained by people with interests in the myth's persistence. Children who learn this lesson in a story about a ghost in a haunted mansion in a cartoon will carry it differently than children who learn it as a historical fact in a textbook. They will feel it. The ghost of the lumberjack who haunts Northwest Mansion represents the human cost of the Northwest's founding lie. He was cheated. Real labor was done, real backs were bent, real lives were shaped by the promise the Northwests made and then broke. He is not a monster. He is a man who was wronged and who wants, after 150 years, for someone to simply acknowledge it and do something about it. And his connection to Wendy Corduroy, being confirmed as a Corduroy family ancestor, is handled quietly and precisely. The Corduroys are working-class Gravity Falls residents. Manly Dan Corduroy is a logger, the same trade his ancestor practiced. The show is drawing a line from the founding exploitation to the present working-class Corduroys, suggesting that the economic dynamics established in the town's founding persist in the town's present. This is, again, a more sophisticated observation than most children's entertainment attempts, and it is made through a ghost story about a flaming bearded lumberjack rather than a lecture. The town's history with Bill Cipher predates Ford significantly. The cave where Ford found the inscription that led him to summon Bill is ancient. Modoc's encounter with Bill and the creation of the Zodiac prophecy predates the European settlement of the Pacific Northwest by centuries at minimum. The Bill Cipher wheel in the Northwest Mansion, the one painted in a style suggesting it was created by the original inhabitants of the land, is evidence of exactly this. What this means is that Gravity Falls has been a site of interdimensional interest for a very long time. Whatever makes this particular valley a weirdness nexus was already operating when the first human beings arrived in the Pacific Northwest. The local indigenous peoples knew about it. They had their own relationship with the strangeness, their own mythologies that incorporated what they were experiencing. Their own shamans like Modoc who understood it in terms of entities and purposes and the ongoing negotiation between human existence and what lies beyond it. The show handles this history with care. It does not try to represent Native American mythology faithfully or claim to speak from within those traditions. What it does is acknowledge their existence and their relevance. Modoc's prophecy is real and powerful and correct, even if it was ultimately not the mechanism that defeated Bill. The first people who took this place seriously were right to take it seriously. The knowledge did not begin with Ford's journals. This longer historical view also changes how you read the Gravity Falls Cipher Hunt's conclusion. The statue ended up at Confusion Hill, a real roadside attraction that Alex Hirsch has cited as one of the inspirations for the Mystery Shack. Confusion Hill is itself built on land in Northern California, where the geography does things that look impossible to first-time visitors, where water seems to run uphill and your sense of horizontal is persistently wrong. There are multiple such sites along the Pacific coast. Some people think they are optical illusions. Some people think something about the geology and the landscape is creating genuine perceptual anomalies. Some people think something else entirely. Gravity Falls, Oregon, if it existed, would be on this list. Deep Dive. Sous Ramirez and the Importance of Ordinary Goodness. In the hierarchy of characters whose depth the show eventually reveals, Seuss occupies a quieter position than Stan or Ford or McGucket. He does not have a decades-long secret. He does not have a trail of documents and codes and invisible ink pointing to a hidden layer of significance. What he has is a backstory that is, in its own way, the most emotionally consistent and quietly devastating thing in the show. Sous Ramirez is 22 years old when Dipper and Mabel arrive in Gravity Falls. He is Stan's handyman, a man of indeterminate large build and enormous good nature, who describes himself with a question mark symbol. Appropriate, because there is something about Seuss that resists easy categorization. He is funny in a very specific way, a way that requires genuine commitment and a complete absence of self-awareness about his own absurdity, and he makes the show funnier whenever he is in it. The show eventually reveals that Seuss has spent most of his life waiting for his father. His father left when Seuss was very young and has sent him a birthday card on his birthday every year, and Seuss has kept every one of those cards, and he believes with the specific kind of hope that is one layer of insulation away from grief. that his father will eventually come back. He has built his entire understanding of what the future looks like around a man who has not been there. Stan is the father figure who is actually present, not consciously, not self-declaredly. Stan does not sit Zeus down and say, "I am going to be the father you didn't have." Stan is gruff and occasionally uses Zeus to run interference on things he doesn't want to deal with and makes him wear humiliating Mystery Shack costumes for promotional purposes. But Stan is also genuinely fond of Zeus, genuinely relies on him, and at the end of the series trusts him with the Mystery Shack itself, which is the most significant thing Stan owns and the physical embodiment of 30 years of his life. The episode Blendon's Game, in which Dipper and Mabel travel back in time to Zeus's childhood birthdays to understand why he cares so much about that day, is one of the show's purest emotional experiences. It shows the child Zeus waiting for his father on his birthday with an absolutely heartbreaking patience that has not yet calcified into something worse, and it shows what that waiting does to a person over years. The episode does not condemn the father in explicit terms. It simply shows what was absent and lets you feel the absence. But what makes Zeus as an adult extraordinary is that he is not broken by his father's absence. He is not bitter, not closed off, not building walls. He is the warmest and most open person in the show, the one who consistently assumes the best about people and situations, the one who finds genuine delight in things that other people take for granted. He is found in the community of the Mystery Shack, in his relationship with Stan and Dipper and Mabel and Wendy, something that functions like the family he was missing. He has done this not because the wound healed, but because he chose to keep showing up anyway. Alex Hirsch based the character of Zeus on a college friend named Jesus, who was, as Hirsch described him, a friendly, lovable, and deeply strange human being who gravitated towards staying involved with the place and people he cared about, even past the obvious stopping points. The specificity of the inspiration shows in the character. Zeus does not feel generic. He feels like a person who exists with all the specific contradictions that actual people contain. His character's question mark symbol on the Bill Cipher wheel, which seems to represent uncertainty or openness, is also a description of something admirable: the willingness to not have the answer, to remain available to what comes next. In a show populated by characters defined by what they know, Ford's journals, Stan's secrets, Dipper's research, Zeus's question mark is the honest acknowledgement that he doesn't know what he is or will be, and that this is not a failure but a kind of freedom. The deep dive. Wendy Corduroy and the Passage of Time. Wendy Corduroy is 15 when Dipper and Mabel arrive in Gravity Falls. She works part-time at the Mystery Shack. She is conspicuously cooler than nearly everyone she encounters, and she is Dipper's unrequited crush for most of the first season and part of the second. Her role in the show's early episodes is partly defined by this dynamic. She exists to some extent as the object of Dipper's attention, the person he is always slightly nervous around, the reason he wants to look capable and impressive. The show eventually does something more interesting with her than the crush arc suggests it would. Wendy is also a person dealing with things. She comes from the Corduroy family, which means she is the daughter of Manly Dan, who is simultaneously very loving in his way and the kind of parent whose way of showing love involves physical roughhousing, logging competitions, and an approach to emotional processing that is not particularly nuanced. She has multiple brothers who are similarly overwhelming. She has chosen, as her retreat from this family environment, the Mystery Shack, which is at minimum quieter and more interesting than logging. Her competence in a crisis is genuine and consistent throughout the show. When Weirdmageddon begins and Dipper needs to get to Mabel quickly, Wendy is the one who drives, without a license, without training, through apocalyptic chaos, because someone needs to, and she is the person present who can. She fights, she improvises. She is not, at any point in the series, a character whose function is to be rescued. This is worth noting explicitly because it was not guaranteed given her initial introduction. Her ice bag symbol on the Bill Cipher wheel might seem less obviously meaningful than the pine tree or the shooting star, but within the logic of the show, it connects to her self-possessed coolness. The way she maintains a kind of equilibrium in the face of extraordinary circumstances that reads as casual but is actually a practiced emotional skill. She is, in her own way, one of the most grounded people in Gravity Falls. grounded in the sense of knowing who she is and not particularly needing anyone else's validation of that, which is a quality that Dipper, who is still very much in the process of figuring out who he is, recognizes and finds genuinely admirable. But her relationship with Dipper resolves in a way that is unusual for this kind of will they won't they dynamic in children's entertainment. They talk about it directly. Wendy tells Dipper with genuine care that she is 3 years older than him, that they are in different places in their lives, that what he feels is real, and she values him as a friend, and things between them are not going to be romantic right now. And then they remain friends, actually remain friends, in a way that the show takes seriously as a positive outcome rather than a consolation prize. This is worth noting because a lot of fiction for young audiences handles the unrequited crush dynamic by either eventually delivering the hoped-for outcome or treating the absence of it as tragedy. Wendy's conversation with Dipper is the show saying, no, actually, this is a valuable thing to learn. How to care about someone, be told that the relationship is not what you hoped, and build a different but genuine version of connection with them. This is an adult skill. Most adults are still learning it. The show gave it to 12-year-olds. Deep dive. The weirdness underneath. There is a recurring theme in Gravity Falls that the show never states explicitly, but that structures almost every episode and almost every character arc, the relationship between what is visible and what is real. The Mystery Shack is a perfect external expression of this theme. It is, on its surface, exactly what it presents itself as, a tourist trap, deliberately cheesy, selling fabricated oddities to gullible visitors. That is the visible layer. Underneath it is a real research facility documenting genuine paranormal phenomena. Underneath that is a portal to another dimension. Underneath that is 30 years of a man's devotion to his brother, compressed into the mechanical and electrical guts of a machine that most visitors to the building above will never know exists. Every layer is true. The Mystery Shack really is a tourist trap. Stan really is running a con. The exhibits really are mostly fake. And underneath all of that, sincerely and without irony, is a machine that can open a hole in the fabric of reality and pull a person back from the void between dimensions. The fakeness and the realness coexist, stacked on top of each other, and the only way to see all of it at once is to pay attention from the right angle. Now, this structural metaphor repeats throughout the show in ways both literal and figurative. Gravity Falls itself is, on the surface, a quiet, small Oregon town with a tourist economy and some local color. Underneath it is one of the most anomalously strange locations in the world, the site of ongoing supernatural phenomena that would rewrite the laws of physics if anyone in a position of scientific authority could be made to look at them without flinching. The town's comfortable surface, the diners and the politics and the Pioneer Day celebrations and the mayor's races, is layered over a history of interdimensional entities and secret societies and portals and prophecies that goes back centuries. And the characters are built on this same architecture. Stan looks like a crook and is also the most selflessly devoted person in the show. Ford looks like a hero and made choices that enabled the show's primary catastrophe. Pacifica looks like a villain and is also a 12-year-old whose parents condition her with a bell. Bill looks like comedy relief and is the most genuinely dangerous entity in the show's mythology. Nobody in Gravity Falls is fully visible at the surface level. Everybody has something underneath. This is the show's epistemology in narrative form. The world contains more than it shows. The people in your life are more complicated than your initial read of them. The comfortable story you've been told about your community's history may have been constructed by people with interest in that story's persistence. Paying attention, asking questions, looking at things from new angles, these are not just useful habits. They are the habits of someone who is actually seeing the world they live in rather than the version of it that has been prepared for easy consumption. Gravity Falls is a show that loves its audience enough to tell them, the world is hiding things from you and you are capable of finding them, and finding them will matter. That is not a comfortable message. It is an honest one. And it is exactly the right message for the kind of show that hides messages in its credits and its reversed whispers and its invisible ink pages. The world has been telling you things in codes all along. You just needed to learn how to listen backwards. And that is Gravity Falls. All of it. as much as can be covered in words across 4 hours of storytelling. The codes and the ciphers and the opening credits and the hidden things. Stan's lie and his love. Ford's brilliance and his damage. McGucket's tragedy and his recovery. Dipper and Mabel and the summer that changed them. Pacifica learning to be a person outside her family. Bill Cipher, ancient and broken and performing exuberance to cover a loneliness that spans 1,000,000,000,000 years. The axelottle, patient and enormous, waiting for the day someone is finally ready to stop running from what they did. And the town itself. Always the town. Pine trees so tall they block out most of the afternoon sky, and something watching from between them, and a sign beside a dirt road where someone has scratched out the population number and written a question mark, and underneath everything else, always, the feeling that paying attention here will find you something worth finding. Get some rest. You've earned it. Good night. Ciao. The full creature compendium. Every significant entity in Gravity Falls. Let's slow down here and go through the creatures, entities, and paranormal phenomena of Gravity Falls in genuine depth, because Journal 3 is a thick book for a reason. The town doesn't just have a couple of monsters. It is essentially a living encyclopedia of things that should not be possible, each one with its own rules and its own history, and its own connection to the broader mythology. This is the part of the lore that the show builds across 40 episodes as a consistent background, always there, always adding texture, always making Gravity Falls feel like a real place with real accumulated strangeness. The gnomes. We keep coming back to them because they keep insisting on attention. The gnomes of Gravity Falls are not the garden ornament variety. They are small, bearded, pointed hat-wearing creatures who live in the forest and organize themselves into colonies with specific social hierarchies. They can stack themselves inside clothing to approximate human shape with unsettling accuracy. Specifically, they do this to attempt romantic relationships with human women, which is concerning on multiple levels. Their leader during the events of the show is named Jeff, which is an excellent name for a gnome. They are capable of being individually defeated without much difficulty, but collectively form something considerably more formidable, as the Season 1 finale demonstrates when they merge into a giant gnome monster that Stan has to drive a golf cart into to stop. Now, they respect Mabel after the leaf blower incident in a way that suggests they have a functional hierarchy of respect based on demonstrated capability. They survive Weirdmageddon by taking shelter in the Mystery Shack with the other survivors, which means they spent the apocalypse sharing a building with Old Man McGucket and his raccoon wife, which no one comments on directly. The Shapeshifter. One of the genuinely unsettling things about the show. Ford built a bunker in the woods to contain his most dangerous experiments, and the Shapeshifter is the one that demonstrates most clearly why containment was necessary. It can replicate any creature it has seen, including people, with complete physical accuracy. Its voice changes, its proportions change. It thinks. Ford's journal notes with visible concern that no prison can reliably hold it. And this concern is validated when it nearly escapes during Dipper and Ford's exploration of the bunker. Its final form before being recontained, a grotesque partial imitation of Dipper, stuck mid-transformation, screaming, is one of the most viscerally upsetting images in the show. It is in the bunker because it has to be. What happens to it after Weirdmageddon is never addressed, which is one of the show's more deliberately hanging questions. The Gremloblin. A creature that looks unpleasant and, if you look into its eyes, will show you your worst nightmares. It is the creature that first pushed Fiddleford McGucket toward the memory gun, before the portal incident, before Bill was part of his story. McGucket looked into its eyes and saw something he could not carry. But the Gremloblin in the show is used partially for comedy. Its encounter with Stan produces a vision of Stan's nightmare, which is that customers aren't spending enough money at the Mystery Shack, but its role in the backstory is entirely serious. It is the first crack in Fiddleford's resilience. Everything that follows builds on it. The Manitors, half man, half bull, living in a cave system in the mountains surrounding Gravity Falls, organizing their society around very specific and somewhat arbitrary standards of manliness. They appear in an episode focused on Dipper's anxieties about masculinity, which is partly comic and partly a genuine examination of what it does to a person to believe that their worth is contingent on meeting a specific performance standard. The Multi-Bear. Who is a bear with multiple heads who listens to teen pop music? is introduced in the same episode as the antithesis of everything the Manitors represent, and the show clearly prefers the multi-bears approach. This is, in a very small format, an argument about the damage that rigid gender performance does to the people trying to maintain it. The Summerween Trickster. Summerween is Gravity Falls' second Halloween, celebrated in July because the town apparently enjoys Halloween enough to want it twice a year. The Trickster is a creature who emerges during Summerween to consume anyone who does not take the holiday seriously. Specifically, anyone who says that candy is gross, or who treats trick-or-treating as silly. This is played for horror throughout most of the episode, and the creature is effectively frightening before its origin is revealed. Its origin, it is constructed from rejected Halloween candy. The candy that was always passed over, always the last to be chosen, always the piece that children threw away or gave back. It formed a consciousness out of being unwanted. It consumes people who don't appreciate Halloween because its existence is built from not being appreciated. Its death, when it finally collapses, involves it eating a piece of the candy it is made of, and the moment is funnier than the emotion it generates in certain viewers might suggest. The Pterodactyl. Old Man McGucket, during one of his more productive mental instability phases, built what he described as a homicidal pterodactyl. He mentions this casually in an early episode as one of the things he made when his wife left him. But the pterodactyl exists somewhere. It is presumably still somewhere in the vicinity of Gravity Falls. This is one of the show's running background threats that is treated primarily as a joke, but that implies a genuine ongoing danger. Anyone who goes pterodactyl watching in the Gravity Falls area is probably asking for something uncomfortable. The Gideon Bot. A giant mechanized robot built to Gideon Gleeful's specifications as part of his Season 1 campaign to take over the Mystery Shack. It is, for scale purposes, probably about 3 stories tall. It was eventually defeated, and its wreckage was incorporated into McGucket's Shacktron during Weirdmageddon, with the right leg of the Gideon Bot becoming the right leg of the assembled mech. Thus, the Gideon Bot represents the show's ongoing interest in what happens when a child is given resources disproportionate to their wisdom. Gideon built a giant robot to settle a property dispute with his 12-year-old rivals, and this is played as both silly and genuinely threatening in the way that only a show which respects its villain can manage. The Ghosts. Gravity Falls has a significant ghost population, and the show uses them differently in different episodes. The ghosts in Headhunters are straightforward paranormal entities associated with the Wax Museum. The ghosts in The Inconveniencing are teenage poltergeists haunting an abandoned convenience store, in an episode that is more explicitly horror-influenced than most of the show's early episodes. The Ghost of Archibald Corduroy in Northwest Mansion Mystery is something different. A specific human person with specific grievances, haunting a specific place for specific reasons, capable of being appeased only by a specific act. His design is genuinely frightening, and his motivation is completely sympathetic. The show is never condescending about what it takes to put a ghost to rest. The Golembolus. A creature made of detritus from the Mystery Shack's accumulated oddities that animates during a specific sequence. There are multiple instances throughout the show of inanimate objects animating under various circumstances, from weirdness waves to Bill's direct influence to apparently spontaneous processes. This is consistent with the show's broader suggestion that the boundary between the animate and the inanimate is considerably more porous in Gravity Falls than anywhere else. The Time Baby. Worth returning to in this context. Time Baby is a genuinely powerful entity in the show's mythology, the supreme authority of temporal law capable of bending time, leading a dedicated enforcement squad. He is enormous, vaguely infantile in appearance, and speaks with absolute authority. He is also defeated by Bill in approximately 2 seconds, which establishes the power scale for Weirdmageddon more effectively than any amount of description could. The reveal in Journal 3 that his squad had only sent holo projections is not a retcon of his power level, but a confirmation that he is cautious. Powerful entities are cautious, because they know better than to take unnecessary risks. The fact that he is still cautious about Bill Cipher is its own kind of testimony. The Gobblewonker, a local legend, a lake monster of the Loch Ness variety, reported to exist in the lake near Gravity Falls. The first episode about it reveals that the Gobblewonker sightings were caused by a mechanical version that McGucket built to get attention because his son wouldn't spend time with him. This is the show's first genuinely touching monster reveal. The monster was a sad old man trying to be seen. But there is a detail in Journal 3 suggesting that a real Gobblewonker may also exist in the lake, independent of McGucket's construction. Gravity Falls is a place where the mechanical and the authentic can coexist, where the fabricated legend can run alongside the genuine article without either canceling the other. The Eyebats. During Weirdmageddon, Bill deploys Eyebats, winged eyeballs that can petrify anyone they look at directly, as crowd control throughout Gravity Falls. They are, visually, one of Bill's most distinctive contributions to the apocalypse, and they are connected to his general eye-based imagery. The Eye of Providence, the single eye in the triangle that Bill's design derives from, becomes real and mobile and dangerous during Weirdmageddon, in a way that feels like a logical evolution of the show's visual language. The Eyebats are also a reminder that Bill's domain is always perception, always what you see and what you don't, always the gap between the visible and the real. The Northwest Manor paintings. Not creatures precisely, but entities. The paintings in Northwest Manor come to life during the haunting. Specifically, an ancestor portrait empties, and the taxidermied animal heads on the walls begin to ooze blood and chant ancient sins in unison. The animation of painted images is one of Bill's techniques, and also appears to be something the haunting of the manor enables independently, suggesting that the Northwest Mansion has a kind of ambient supernatural charge that doesn't require Bill's direct involvement. 150 years of uncleaned karmic debt accumulates into something visible and physical eventually. The Blendon Blandon and the Time Police. Blendon Blandon is a minor time travel agent who first appears to investigate temporal anomalies caused by Dipper and Mabel's time travel adventures. Now, he subsequently becomes the unwilling vessel that Bill possesses to carry his rift-breaking plan forward in the Season 2 finale. His later canonical fate, revealed in supplementary material, involves extensive involvement with the Time Police's investigation, and ultimately being stranded in the 1880s when a train destroys his time machine, which is one of the more unfortunate ends to a character arc in the show. He was trying to do his job. He was not adequately prepared for the specific category of problem Gravity Falls represents. The Undead. Season 2 opens with Scary Oak, an episode in which Stan accidentally summons a zombie horde during the Mystery Shack's karaoke reopening party. The zombies are attracted by the fact that the government's investigation of the shack has, while in the process of using equipment designed to detect supernatural activity, accidentally broadcast a frequency that reanimates the dead within a certain radius. This connects the zombie outbreak directly to the government's presence, suggesting that government attempts to control or monitor the supernatural in Gravity Falls are as likely to create new problems as to solve existing ones. The zombies are dispatched through karaoke, specifically through the pitch and harmonic qualities of three-part harmonized singing, which is one of the show's best comedic solutions to a supernatural problem. The Lilliputians, small creatures living inside the mini golf course outside Gravity Falls, with a complex internal society that mirrors and parody the social hierarchies of human institutions. And the Lilliputians organize themselves into thematic groups based on which mini-golf obstacle they inhabit. The Windmill Faction, the Pirate Ship Faction, the Fairy Castle Faction, each with their own customs and concerns and territorial disputes. When Mabel enlists their help to cheat at golf against Pacifica, they initially comply and then, as they tend to do, develop independent judgments about what would be most satisfying, which leads to an attempted assassination. They are both completely absurd and a fairly precise observation about how institutional cultures develop their own logic that can diverge significantly from the purposes they were ostensibly created for. The Summerween Trickster, Second Look. Let's go deeper on this one, because it deserves it. The monster built from rejected candy is, on reflection, at one of the show's most elegantly constructed metaphorical creatures. The candy it is made from was never chosen. It was the candy people accepted reluctantly and then discarded. Every piece of it has spent time being held and then put aside as not worth having. And from all of those individual small rejections, something organized itself. something that learned to want, learned to resent, learned to seek acknowledgement from the people whose predecessors had denied it. This is not a metaphor that the show states explicitly, but it is a metaphor that is right there in the premise, available to anyone willing to sit with it. The thing that forms from accumulated small dismissals is something hungry and persistent and genuinely dangerous until it is given the recognition it needed. The resolution, Dipper accepts the candy, now actually eats it, is the show saying, sometimes the thing that frightens you is frightening because it has been denied for too long, and the act of genuine acknowledgement is the only thing that can actually put it to rest. Deep dive, the broader mythology. Time, dimensions, and scales of power, Gravity Falls exists within a multiverse. This is established explicitly when Ford's research involves interdimensional travel, confirmed by Bill's status as an interdimensional entity, and extended by the connections the show draws to other animated properties. The show's clearest canonical connection to another property is with Rick and Morty. In the Rick and Morty episode Morty's Mindblowers, there are memory capsules labeled Stanford and Bill C. In the Gravity Falls episode Society of the Blind Eye, Stan's mug, notepad, and pen get sucked through a dimensional portal and later appear in the Rick and Morty episode Close Encounters of the Rick Kind. These are not coincidences. They are coordinated Easter eggs between two creative teams who were in communication about the shared possibility space. Justin Roiland, Rick and Morty's co-creator, has stated that due to infinite realities in the multiverse, everything is canon. This is both a very Rick Sanchez thing to say and a precise description of how to hold these connections. Not as a firm fictional shared universe in the Marvel sense, but as an acknowledgement that if infinite realities exist, a version of Gravity Falls and a version of Rick and Morty's universe inhabit the same multiversal fabric. What this means for the mythology is that the interdimensional entities in Gravity Falls, Bill and his associates, the Nightmare Realm creatures, the Time Baby, and his enforcement squad, are operating within a broader framework that extends well beyond the Pacific Northwest of Oregon. The Nightmare Realm is not the only source of chaos in this multiverse. The Time Baby is not the only temporal authority. There are other forces, other histories, other conflicts happening in the dimensions that touch the ones the show directly depicts. This broader context does not change the specific story Gravity Falls tells, but it gives that story a different sense of scale. The events in Gravity Falls, Oregon, in the summer of 2012, they involved the near destruction of an entire physical universe by an entity who had already destroyed one entire universe and was attempting to destroy another. This is not a small event in the context of the multiverse. The Time Baby's appearance with his enforcement squad, however brief, suggests that other dimensional authorities were aware of what was happening and attempting, however unsuccessfully, to address it. The axelottle's power level, which ranks above Time Baby's and above Bill's, suggests that there are forces in this multiverse specifically concerned with maintaining the conditions for growth and change. The Theraprism, which exists outside of time and space, is an institution, which means it has precedent, has dealt with other cases, has a methodology and presumably a history of both failures and successes. Bill is not the first villain it has attempted to rehabilitate. He may not be the most difficult case it has encountered. The scale of time in the show's mythology is also worth sitting with. Bill is approximately 1 trillion years old. The physical universe, in real cosmological terms, is approximately 13.8 billion years old. Bill has existed for roughly 100 times the current age of the universe. The axelottle, whose power exceeds Bill's, is presumably older. The forces that were already operating in and around Gravity Falls when the first humans arrived in the Pacific Northwest are part of a history that extends backward to a depth that the human mind is genuinely not well equipped to process. The show uses these timescales to make a specific point about the relative position of human lives. In the context of 1 trillion years, the summer of 2012 is a unit so small as to be functionally immeasurable. The 30 years Stan spent working on the portal, which felt enormous from inside that life, are equally immeasurable. The human scale is tiny against the cosmic scale, and yet the human scale is the one that matters. The thing that defeats Bill Cipher, in the end, is not cosmic power or temporal authority or an ancient prophecy. It is two 12-year-olds who know their great-uncle well enough to pull a twin swap at the exact right moment, and a retired con man who loves his brother enough to let his own mind be destroyed. The show is insisting, with full awareness of the cosmic scale it has established, that human love and human choices are the load-bearing elements of a universe that is otherwise incomprehensibly large and old and strange. This is not naive, it is a philosophical position that the significance of events is not proportional to their duration or their spatial extent, but to the quality of what happens within them. Stan's sacrifice takes approximately 5 minutes of screen time. It has more weight than a trillion years of Bill's waiting. This is what Gravity Falls is saying at its most fundamental level. The universe is strange and vast and contains entities that have existed for longer than any human mind can fully comprehend. And in that universe, what matters is still what happens between people who love each other in the specific times and places where they find themselves, with the tools they have available. That the scale doesn't diminish the love. The love doesn't diminish the scale. They are both real and both matter, and the show holds them in the same frame without flinching. And on that note, we are genuinely done. Every section that needed covering has been covered. Every secret that could be named has been named. From the whispered Cipher instructions in the opening theme to the blue glow of a stone triangle in a forest, from a brilliant man's desperate 30-year vigil to a young girl showing her great-uncle a scrapbook in the hope that it would bring him back, from a trillion-year-old flat creature who destroyed his home and spent eternity trying not to think about it, to the very specific and very human way that love moves through families that have hurt each other and are trying imperfectly to repair what they broke. This is Gravity Falls. All of it. Thank you for spending this time in it. Sleep well. The lights in the Mystery Shack are still on. And remember, abate, there is always something hidden in the background. You just have to know how to look. Good night. Uncle Grunkle, YouTube channel? Like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Afterward, the show that changed animation. Let's take a final long breath and look at Gravity Falls in the context of what it did for animated television as a form. Because the show's influence on what came after it is significant and worth documenting, and understanding that influence is part of understanding what the show was trying to do. When Gravity Falls premiered in 2012, the landscape of animation for young audiences was very different from what it became in the following decade. Shows for children and teenagers were, by and large, organized around one of two models. Episodic adventure with minimal continuity, in which each episode was self-contained and the characters reset to their starting positions at the end, or serialized drama with significant mythology but generally lower production values and less sophisticated writing. The rare shows that attempted to combine genuine serial storytelling with high production values and emotional complexity tended to appear on premium channels or to be aimed at adult audiences. What Gravity Falls did on a broadcast Disney Channel with the production constraints that implies, was combine all three elements: episodic adventure that was genuinely funny and entertaining on its own terms, serialized mythology of real depth and complexity, and emotional character arcs that treated its audience's intelligence and emotional capacity with complete respect. It proved that these things were compatible, that you didn't have to choose between accessible and sophisticated, between funny and meaningful, between episodic and serialized. The shows that followed it, Steven Universe, which had already been developing in parallel, Gravity Falls' direct spiritual heir Over the Garden Wall, Amphibia and The Owl House in later years, many others, all operate in a space that Gravity Falls helped establish. The idea that animated shows for young audiences could have genuine mysteries, earned emotional payoffs, sophisticated thematic content, and hidden layers of meaning for attentive viewers. That idea was not new in 2012, but Gravity Falls demonstrated it with a clarity and commercial success that made it impossible to ignore. The specific technique of embedding hidden messages for the audience to decode was also influential. It changed the relationship between creator and audience in ways that persist. The internet had already created communities around media analysis, but Gravity Falls gave those communities something specific and productive to do. Not just speculate, but actually decode, actually find hidden content, actually participate in a structured puzzle that the creator had designed for them. This is a mode of engagement that has become increasingly common in ambitious media properties. Gravity Falls did not invent it, but it deployed it with a sophistication that established a new standard. Alex Hirsch ended the show at season 2 by his own choice, which was itself influential. The decision to end a successful show on your own terms, before it has run out of story, before the mythology has been diluted by the need to generate more seasons, was not common in animation at the time. Most successful animated shows run until they no longer can, accumulating seasons past the point of their creative peak because the commercial incentive to continue exceeds the creative incentive to stop. Hirsch chose differently. He had planned a story with a specific ending, and when the ending arrived, he ended the story. This was a choice that cost him something commercially and gave the show something artistically: integrity. My Gravity Falls is not the story of a show that didn't know when to stop. It is the story of a show that knew exactly when to stop and stopped there. The ending earned its emotional weight partly because the creators were willing to actually commit to it, to not leave a door open for a comfortable continuation, to let the characters actually conclude their arcs rather than being maintained indefinitely. This is also why the Book of Bill, which exists in a complicated relationship with the show's finality, works as well as it does. It doesn't undo the ending. It doesn't tell a continuation story that negates what the finale accomplished. It operates from the margins, from the perspective of the defeated villain, adding texture and answering questions, while explicitly declining to give Bill the victory of an actual return. How Hirsch managed to expand the mythology without compromising the ending, which is genuinely difficult to do and which reflects a real understanding of what the original ending was doing and why. The Cipher Hunt was part of the same instinct. Don't let the story end coldly. Let it transition into something that continues to reward engagement without requiring a continuation. Give the audience something to do that uses the skills the show developed in them, that honors the relationship between the show and its community, that provides a kind of closure through the act of collective achievement rather than through more story. Gravity Falls cared about its audience, not in a sentimental, vague way, but in a precise and operationalized way. It kept finding specific things to do that demonstrated that care. The reversed whispers, the decoded messages, the real Journal 3 with its blacklight writing, the Cipher Hunt, the Book of Bill, the ARG. Each one was Alex Hirsch saying, "You came back, and here is something I made for you because I knew you would." That relationship between creator and audience is rare. It is the kind of thing that happens when a creator genuinely loves the thing they're making and trusts the people who love it with them. It is not guaranteed by talent or by planning or by commercial success. It is a quality of character, and it shows up in every piece of Gravity Falls, from the first reversed whisper to the final blue glow of a stone triangle in the dark of an Oregon forest. There is one more thing to say, and then we really are done. But the reason Gravity Falls will still be worth watching in 50 years? The reason people will still be finding new things in the background of scenes, still connecting details between the episodes and the journals and the books, still feeling the specific emotion of the ending, is not the mystery. The mystery is the vehicle. The reason is the love. Stan loves Ford enough to spend 30 years on an impossible project and erase himself to save him. Ford loves Dipper enough to treat his questions as worthy of serious answers. Fiddleford loves truth enough to walk away from a project when he understands what it will cost. Mabel loves everyone around her so thoroughly and so specifically that the show can use her choices as its moral compass throughout. The Dipper loves the idea of understanding things and loves the people he is with while understanding them. Bill loves nothing. That is his tragedy. He wanted love, wanted to be loved by his world, wanted to be the best baby, wanted Ford to genuinely mean it when he called him his muse. And he got it wrong, in the same way he got everything wrong, by taking rather than receiving, by consuming rather than connecting. He destroyed his world when it didn't give him what he wanted, and he has been destroying things ever since and calling it liberation. And it has never been anything other than grief. The show knows this. It holds it. It offers it to you without underlining it, trusting that you will feel the weight of it when you are ready. And when you are ready, whether you are 12 or 20 or 40 or somewhere you didn't expect to be, Gravity Falls will be there in the pine trees, waiting with everything it has hidden in its walls, ready to show you whichever layer you are ready to see. That is what the show is. That is what it has always been. A gift, timed to arrive at the moment you can receive it. Good night. Sleep well. The Mystery Shack lights are on. The sounds of Gravity Falls. There is one more dimension of the show that rarely gets the attention it deserves, and that is its sound design and music. The Gravity Falls score was composed by Brad Breek, and it deserves recognition as one of the great television scores of its era. The main theme is only the beginning. Across the series, Breek developed a consistent musical language that uses the specific tonal qualities of the Pacific Northwest landscape, spare, somewhat melancholy, always a little eerie, to anchor every scene in the show's emotional and atmospheric reality. The music in Gravity Falls works on two levels simultaneously, just like everything else in the show. On the surface level, it is functional. It tells you when to be scared, when to laugh, when to feel something deep and sad. Below that surface level, it is doing something more specific. The recurring leitmotifs, the brief musical phrases that recur across episodes to signal particular characters or ideas, are placed with such precision that rewatching reveals them operating as a kind of countertext to the visual narrative. Like when Stan's leitmotif plays us under a scene that is ostensibly about something else, the music is telling you that Stan is what this scene is actually about. The music knows things the script hasn't said yet. The reversed audio in the opening theme is not just a Cipher delivery mechanism. It is sonically interesting on its own terms, creating a texture that is both familiar and wrong, that registers as slightly off without the analytical part of your brain being able to immediately identify why. This is by design. The show wanted its opening sequence to feel like something you had heard before, but not quite, something that was almost a memory of a different piece of music. The reversed whispers live inside that almost familiarity. And they work partly because the musical context already has your subconscious slightly unsettled and paying more attention than usual. The Weirdmageddon episodes have their own distinct musical palette, neon and angular and somehow both apocalyptic and festive, because Bill's End of the World is a party first and a catastrophe second. The contrast between that frantic energy and the quiet piano notes that accompany the memory gun scene is one of the most effective uses of musical contrast in the series. You have been living in Bill's chaos for 3 episodes, and then, in 30 seconds of quiet piano, you are in a completely different emotional register, and the transition is both abrupt and completely right. The Shacktron battle sequence, scored with a rock arrangement of the main theme, represents the show making a specific musical argument that the theme of the show, the whistled melody that has always been slightly melancholy, contains within it the possibility of triumph. The same notes that accompany Dipper finding the journal in the first episode, that accompany the quiet mysteries of a summer in a strange Oregon town, are also the notes that accompany a mystery shack mech walking into battle against an interdimensional demon. They are the same music. They were always the same music. This is Gravity Falls completing its own circle. The theme was always the whole story in 30 seconds of sound, the mystery and the fight and the love and the ending. All of it was in the whistled melody from the beginning, waiting for the right arrangement to make it audible. Just like everything else. Like this video? Then subscribe to Uncle Grunkle for more deep lore, ASMR storytelling, and long nights in strange places. Drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. The community is part of what makes this worth doing. Thank you for being here. Good night.